That gets me every time. That little feedback thing just gets me every time. I don't know why I can't catch it, but I guess I'm just not smart enough. Hi, everybody. It's the Stratosphere Lounge episode number 96. 96. That's kind of amazing, really, when you think about it. Yeah, you know. Never the same twice. Just did some work on that new roll-in music, which if you're watching on YouTube, you really missed. It was a collection of my favorite kind of 60s themes. And man, there's some great stuff that they wrote for television back in those days. They don't really like that anymore. Went through a whole bunch of them. As a matter of fact, I think some people are probably going to be interested. Let me see if I can bring up what that was we played, because 60s music themes, I just found one or two of them, and then I just couldn't put them down. So we did a bunch of them. But we went long. We're starting a little late tonight, but I have to tell you we're starting late because I had to hear my favorite of those themes, which was the last one we played. And just for those of you who are interested, what we had for our walk-in today was Apache, followed by Space Ghost, Dark Shadows, Lost in Space, both themes with a little bit of interconnecting music. Time Tunnel, which is a great theme. The reason I like the Time Tunnel, you know, there's so much. I just love that kind of early 60s period America, kind of at the height of its powers thing. And Time Tunnel has a great theme, and it also had a great logo. The logo for Time Tunnel was an hourglass, real stylized hourglass, and down at the bottom was like a man being crushed by the grains of sand. It was absolutely epic. So Time Tunnel was on the list. Early 70s show called UFO, which was, you know, okay. Kind of predecessor for everybody's saying the mic's hot. I'll see if I can turn that down a little bit. UFO was a predecessor for Space 1999, a Jerry Anderson show. And I'll walk that audio down a little bit more here. But in any event, it was set in 1980, in the far distant future of 1980. And took place in underneath a movie studio. That's where UFO headquarters were, and Shadow, SHADO was the name of the organization. Supreme Headquarters, Alien Defense Organization, and the whole thing was run by a guy with a super bad Roman haircut named Stryker, and he was a studio executive, but that was just his cover job, because down below Stryker Studios or whatever it was the Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization with all the different anti-UFO hardware. So that was a really cool show, but the theme was the greatest ever. Bump, 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 ba-da-da-dum, boo-doo-doo-doo. Fantastic. Then we played The Munsters, which is rockin' cool tune, just a swinging tune. Jetsons, classic. I heard, as I was listening to the Jetsons theme on the air, I realized that at the very end, when he's on the treadmill, that whoosh, 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 little sound effect, I think that exact sound effect, that Jetsons sound effect, was stolen. Well, I'm sure they paid for it, but it sounds almost exactly like the sound that the iPhone makes when it gets a text. Whoosh, that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure they just got it right off the Jetsons. I never realized that before. Then we played The Twilight Zone. And then we played what I think is the greatest, maybe one of the greatest themes ever. I've got 15 people telling me the sound is too loud, and I've worked on it now. Thank you. And that's the problem with a 12-minute delay or whatever this is, up and down. The Johnny Quest theme. The Johnny Quest theme would be just great music in a lounge anywhere. I mean, it's just an incredible theme. You have bongos, you got clarinets and trombones, and, you know, it's just, the brass comes in. It's just so paced, and it's, what is it, minute and a half? I'll tell you how long it is. It's 1 minute and 43 seconds, and it's just wicked cool. And after Johnny Quest, we went to Petula to get us back in the show. So, yeah, fun stuff, and I'll keep that in the rotation so we can, you know, play that a little more. I've also got a couple on there. It's About Time that I didn't play, and Peter Gunn theme is great, Spider-Man theme, and finally Super Chicken, because you can't go back in time without Super Chicken. Buck, 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 buck. Call up for Super Chicken. Buck, 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 buck. Classic. Anyway, so we got a show business theme show tonight. Excuse me, cannot shake this little tickle cough. This will be at least a two-parter and maybe a three-parter, but at least a two-parter. And before we get rolling tonight, the keeper of the gates of the Stratosphere Lounge, standing outside the door very now, right in the second, holding a flaming sword like the Oscar holds his flaming sword, guarding the gates. Our friend Eisenfire, who's done so much for this organization, done so much for the Stratosphere Lounge, and we're going to have some announcements about that too. We are now on episode 96, so 96, 97, somewhere in the next 5 or 6 weeks, something like that. I will. I just got the greatest suggestion from Ohio Coastie. Just happened to glance up, and I will do it. When we talk about the show tonight. But our friend Eisenfire has a couple of quick announcements, and I'll just sort of cheat and say that he was in here in the studio. We're talking for a little bit, and we are deciding we're going to do something special for the 100th episode show. We're going to do the 100th episode show in here in the Stratosphere Lounge. Duh. But we're going to do it live, and we're going to have a little party. We're going to have a group of people, and they can sit in the various couches and accoutrements that you can see over there. Why is that Dissolve doing it that way? I want some answers. I just want some answers. But we got couches, we got something, we're going to have a special by invitation kind of a thing only, or by request, or we'll figure out how to do it, and we'll make an announcement a little bit in advance, but you can see over there. That's where we're going to do the show. So, that'll be kind of cool. And we'll do the show here, and we'll have ourselves a little party. We got some announcements that we want to make. There's a little black frame in there. It's bugging the daylights out of me. We'll just have ourselves a fun time and party down and celebrate. 100 episodes of anything is a pretty big achievement, especially this gas bag wonder. It's like watching the Hindenburg every week. It starts with the explosion and works its way backwards. But anyway, that's exciting. But anyway, we do have a couple of quick announcements to make, and so I'm going to go ahead and make them. And let me see here if I can get this regurgitated. Okay, so the first one's got to do with the Virtual Research Brigade, which some of you may remember from back in the day. I said I needed some research help, and I ended up getting 800 people or something like that. It was just incredible. I got 800 people in the space of just a few minutes, or an hour or two, and then unfortunately it got so big I couldn't use it. It got a little unwieldy for me, but it has stayed there and has blossomed and grown, and Eisenfire's told me about how amazing and vibrant it is, so he's got a quick announcement that he'd like me to make, and I'd like to get behind this. Basically, it's not like he's telling me what to do, because nobody tells me what to do, and if you think you do, then we have to step outside and come armed. But basically, there's one topic up for discussion, and we're looking at doing a bunch of inside work here at Stratosphere Lounge at BillWhittle.com, and the Virtual Research Brigade, VRB, is one way to do it. We're going to get a link up. We'll probably I'll either make a special post for it after the show, or we'll do it embedded somewhere out. But I'll push out the link to it. But we're trying to get more people into this crowdsourcing thing for TSL 100. So if you want to be part of the Inside Squad, you can go back to the BillWhittle.com page after the show. We'll see if we can get a link up then. But we're going to be making an effort to get that Virtual Research Brigade up and running again, because it's actually a tremendous asset. By the way, my little plugin, which has served me so beautifully for years, is not working. So I'm getting ads on my own show, which is kind of nutty. And somebody just said I'm looking better. I am feeling better. I'm well rested, and I'm not doing the stress thing. And amazing what I dropped all the medication I was on, all of it, just threw it away. And I'm getting a lot of rest, and I'm feeling great. And I'm going to be feeling more great. So thank you for the kind words. And so another quick little announcement is we've got a sort of a clandestine kind of a thing going on, and I'm picking up a shadow from that light right over there. It's coming at me off of my microphone, which is uncool. That's a little better. So here's the second thing. We're actually looking for a few good men and women, and we are looking for a few good men and women for kind of a covert ops thing that we're working on here. And if you want to be a part of this super groovy in-crowd of insiders who have the inside track on the inseam of the inside world of what's going on inside the amazing world of BillWhittle.com, which is, of course, you can see is actually, when you get right down to it, pretty cool kind of a world. There's all kinds of groovy stuff going on out there. Then we have an email contact for you. And if you can do it, we would love to have you be a part of it. So I will now make a brief adjustment to the lighting. And it's a little better. And then, if you want to be part of this groovy scene, or if you want to help out in the sort of Rebel Underground Alliance kind of nifty sort of Black Ops kind of thing that we got going here, we'd love to have you be a part of it. And Eyes on Fire will give you more details than I can give because, frankly, I'm not smart enough to remember all this. But here comes the email address. You want to be part of the one of the hit crowd? Here's how cool this guy is. All you have to do is send one email with the subject titled "I'm in." Just send an email with the subject line, "I'm in." And you can send it to csrgifted@gmail.com. Easy to remember, part of the Common Sense Resistance. CSR Gifted. It's a little self, but hey, who are we to blame? I'm the most vain guy in the center of the universe, and I think he's second. But csrgifted@gmail.com, and just write in, "I'm in." And then, you know what'll happen? Then you'll be in. In what? I don't know. But it's going to be pretty cool. So if you want to get in, that's how you do it. csrgifted@gmail.com. Write in, "I'm in." And then when all of you get in to the in crowd, and you're part of the in scene on the inside, somebody email me and tell me what it is that we're all in together. Because I bet it's pretty cool, but I'm not really completely up to speed on this. Still been sleeping a lot. Things are going on. But if you want to be in, that's what you want to do. I'm going to have some tea. You notice where I got this from? This is sweet tea, and it comes from McDonald's. I make pretty good sweet tea out in Calabasas. Excuse me. And anybody who's ever lived in the South knows that you cannot survive a summer in the South without sweet tea. And in Gainesville at Sonny's Barbecue, which this is comparable to, I have to tell you, this is damn good sweet tea. And I wanted to show the McDonald's thing because I wanted everybody to know that I love my McDonald's. Anyway, yeah, you can't survive in the summer without sweet tea. And Sonny's Barbecue, you get sweet tea the size of a large bucket, and you just drink it all day. You take it with you, load it up with ice. You manage to get through the next hour or two. What the hell was I talking about? Oh, I was bringing up the sweet tea just to say this is the first caffeine I've had in 4 weeks or 5 weeks. That's really pretty amazing when you consider as a guy who grew up on Coca-Cola's candy bars and then started using No-Dose to push through the exhaustion, and then Adderall to push through the exhaustion. Just dropping all of that stuff, just goodbye, gone. I think the reason I slept for 12 days, and when I say slept for 12 days, I mean 18 to 22 hours a day for 12 days. It's quite a lot of sleeping. I suspect on some level I was just, detoxing. It was just going cold turkey off of all of this stuff. Eating a lot less sugar, too. I'm a little worried about this, if you really want to know. I'm worried that I may be actually getting healthier. This is causing me a great deal of concern. It kind of doesn't really jibe with my self-image. For example, one of the things I had to do, when I say had to, I mean I agreed to do, because if I hadn't done it, I'd probably be on the sidewalk someplace. One of the things I agreed to do was start getting, I'm lucky I live very close to a Whole Foods. I went into a Whole Foods the first time, and I went in there and I thought, where's everything? I don't recognize anything. Where's the peanut butter? This isn't peanut butter. This is actual, peanut butter. I don't want peanut butter. I want Skippy Super Chunk, like an American. But I live in very close proximity to a Whole Foods, and one of the things I was told I needed to do was start getting some green in me, because I don't eat a whole lot of vegetables on account of I live at the top of the food chain and I'm an American. So it was recommended that I get one of these intense juice things, and I went in there and had one of these juice things, and I'm here to tell you it was celery, which is good, carrots, which is actually kind of good, apples, which is good, but then kale and spinach, because that's the only green things they had. And oh my God, the first time I drank that stuff, it's like lawn mulch. And the end of it, the very bottom's where all the chlorophyll is. So I knocked one back. And then, for 2 or 3 days, I'm like knocking him back. It's like, oh, God, this is unbearable. It's just like medicine. Then after 2 or 3 days, it's like, that's not bad. And then, and this is the part I'm deeply concerned about, I started actually like looking forward to this. It's like, the carrot stuff's not bad, and I can tolerate this. If you're at the point where you're actually comfortable with that kind of bag of lawn mulch, then chances are you're probably healing and getting healthier, and this concerns me a great deal. I suspect the next thing that'll happen is I'll abandon all my conservative principles, and then I'll become a vegan. Greatest quote of all time, greatest tweet of all time was, I'm going to repeat that email address for those of you who are asking. The greatest tweet of all time was, I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but something like, turns out I was late to the Fight Club meeting, so I missed all of the opening announcements, but I thought Fight Club was great. I'd highly recommend Fight Club to anybody who would want to see it. This is classic. Yeah, well, the first rule of Vegan Club is tell everybody about Vegan Club, and the second rule of Vegan Club is no, seriously, tell everybody about Vegan Club. So anyway, that email address, if you want to be on the inside, again, one more time, is CSR Gifted, no spaces, CSR Charlie Sierra Romeo Golf India Foxtrot Tango Echo Delta CFRgifted@gmail.com. Just send in I'm in and you're in. I don't know what you're in. You might be in trouble, but you're in whatever it is you're in. And I would just like to say at this point, whatever happens, please just stop looking over my shoulder. I find it extremely annoying, and I'm trying to do a show here. So obviously I'm in a better mood. I'm feeling a lot better. It's nice to give up all of this crap and still be happy. I did add apples, Sarge. I had apples. Sarge is already chewing me out because I, didn't add apples. But I had apples. I said apples. I thought I did. All right, let's get going with this show business show, shall we? We're going to do at least 2, but we'll get through half of them tonight, I reckon. And I had the first one all teed up, and then I just happened to glance over at the comment stream, which for those of you watching on YouTube, you're really missing, because honestly, there's a great deal of fun watching the show live because you get to type in things, and occasionally I see them, and then I just stop where I was and get off the rails and start talking again. But this one was a suggestion that was so good, I would have made it my number 1 first choice question if it had been included on the Facebook page. That's where you can ask your questions, by the way. But it wasn't there, and it just showed up. I glanced at it. So this is going to now be the number 1 question on our Show Business Show episode, Show Business episode part 1. And that is this. And I didn't write your name down. Please forgive me. I didn't have time. So if you want to tell me you were the guy, then I will credit you in a moment. Our first question is one of these little pieces of archaeology. It's a little Easter egg. It's one of my favorite things in movies. I only heard about it really about 5-6 years ago. Was completely unaware of it. And if you haven't heard the story, you're unaware of it too, but it's really, really cool. And you can look it up. I think there's a pretty good thing on it on YouTube. And so it's this tremendous little story of a little piece of cinema Easter egg that goes back decades, if not half a century. And it's called the Wilhelm Scream. Now, some of you know about the Wilhelm Scream, but some of you don't. And those of you that don't, you're in for a real treat. As it turns out, there was a Western made, and some people are real experts on this. I just know the basics. But there was a Western, a really trivial Western, extremely minor Western. It was really, I'm sure somebody knows the name of it, but it was just one of those thousands of Westerns that they cranked out during the 30s and 40s. Black and white Western. And there's a scene where there's a guy on a horse, and he gets shot by an Indian with an arrow. And I don't know whether his name was Wilhelm or whether the actor's name was Wilhelm or whatever, but he falls off his horse, and he gives a pretty good scream. He goes, ah! Kind of, ah! Pretty distinctive scream. And that would have been the end of it. It would have been one of 1,000 screams in 1,000 movies, and God knows how many guys screamed when they got shot or shot by guns or whatever, and God knows how many Westerns are made. But there was something about the scream that was really kind of dramatic. It was a little over the top, but it was high-pitched and dramatic and kind of had a bit of a ring to it. So somebody picked it up, and they put it in another movie. And then somebody else realized, hey, that's a pretty good scream, and they put it in a third movie. Ohio Castle, thank you, Ohio Castle, that's his question. And what happened was, once a couple of sound editors who are quiet guys, quiet kind of, keep to themselves, they don't mingle with other people, they're not allowed to. They keep them in a den someplace, in a fairly, fairly quiet underground location. But sound editors down there do a lot of work on their own, takes hours and hours and hours, and they don't get any credit. And these guys made it kind of an in-joke. And they started passing the file around on tape, because this goes back way before the digital era. And so what this Wilhelm Scream was, it became like a greeting card between sound editors. And eventually it got to be an in-joke in the entire film business. And so the Wilhelm Scream is everywhere. I was just about to say, Dave Big Booty just got it right up there, but I was just about to say it's in everything, and probably the most famous version of it is in Star Wars when the first stormtrooper falls off the ledge. But it's everywhere. It's in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's in virtually every movie ever made. Anytime somebody screams or falls or gets hurt, they'll almost always put in the Wilhelm Scream. And after you've heard the Wilhelm Scream enough, you recognize it. You never would have picked it out before if you didn't know the story, but if you go to YouTube and look up the Wilhelm Scream, they'll probably show you every movie that it was in up to when that YouTube video was made. And once you hear it 40 or 50 or 60 times back to back to back to back to back, then you'll never not hear it again. Every time you go see a movie, you'll hear it. I'm pretty sure it was in the first Avengers. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in everything. And I love this kind of stuff. I genuinely love it. I think it's just really, really, really cool, because it's fun. That's called the Bill Coffer, and put that in every movie too. It's just fun, and it's just cool. So when you're done with this, or if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't had enough of this already, or God knows I wouldn't ask anybody to sit through 2.5 hours of this dribble, but if you get to the point where you've got a minute, look up Wilhelm, Wilhelm Scream on YouTube, and be prepared to be amazed, because it's been in everything. It's a great question. Thanks so much, Ohio. All right, moving on. The highest ranked question goes to one of these Tiemans brothers, part of the collective hive mind out there, and I think they already might be in. I'm not sure. Maybe they're already in. They might be out. I don't know. Things change very quickly. They probably were like the first ones in, but now they're like out, and they don't even know they're out. But anyway, the top-ranked question was, if you could live in a movie genre, what would it be? Sci-fi, Western, Cold War, thriller? Well, sure would be horror. I'd just love to live in a horror movie. Obviously, it'd be science fiction. And, I haven't seen Tomorrowland yet. I don't think it's out yet. But there's a lot about the trailer for Tomorrowland that looks a lot like Ejectia, which was a project we did back in the Eject days. Some of you were part of that, and it was about 2007. We were going to make like an online city where people could live and then have all these different things that they could go to. It really was going to be kind of fun. And I just didn't have the resources to get it done. But kind of a group wiki kind of a thing where everybody brings their expertise to the thing. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of the graphic work I was doing at the time is very reminiscent of Tomorrowland, and I'm just going to use Tomorrowland as an example of the sci-fi thing. I think the reason it would be sci-fi for me, in fact, I know the reason it'd be sci-fi for me, is because there's a lot of people out there, and I'm sure a lot of you are like this, who are natural-born explorers, and the curse of our time is that we live in a time when there's nothing left to explore. We've got nothing to explore. It is true there are parts of the Amazon and certainly the ocean beds and all the rest of it that has never really been, trodden by the white man. But the fact of the matter is, you can't go anywhere on this earth where there's not, cell phone coverage. You're not going to find anything new. There's nothing new out there. And there's also, I know this is going to cause problems in Europe, which is why I'll say it twice. There's nothing better out there. There's nothing better. There's nothing more advanced. There's no world out there that would be to me what America would be if I lived in, Nigeria or Guatemala or Thailand. I mean, I would like to see a society that's much more advanced than the one I live in, and there isn't one. It'd be kind of cool. Be neat to see things I hadn't seen before. Be neat to go places I hadn't seen before. Especially be cool to go to places where no one had ever been, where no man has gone before. That would be it. And that's a big part of my makeup, and I suspect a part of your makeup too, is, we're frontier people, and it's in our genes, and we want to go explore frontier, and there aren't any. So you get the sci-fi universe, and you have new frontiers, and I really think that's it. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole Star Trek original series versus Next Generation, other than to say, what I like most about the original series, and especially the exploits of this guy on the wall over here, and those hard to see in the zoom, but those are, the top one is the original series Enterprise, and the middle one is the movie Enterprise, and the bottom one is it's not the second movie Enterprise, it's a fan-based Enterprise. It's the best looking hybrid of what the first series Enterprise should look like. But see that guy over there, he got to see new things every day, or every week anyway, and that would have been cool. And that's what wasn't in the Next Generation. You know, it was an established universe. The original series, you go where no one has gone before, see things you've never seen before. Hey, look, here's a planet where one side of the people's face is black and the other side is white. It's ridiculous, but it's different. And a lot of it wasn't ridiculous. A lot of it was really deep and really, 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 really cool. So, yeah, it would be sci-fi for sure there, Zechariah. And some of it's dark, you know. There's a lot of sci-fi worlds I wouldn't particularly want to live in. Blade Runner's a pretty dark place, although LA is starting to feel more like Blade Runner every day. By the way, Blade Runner, I think, was set in 2017, so we got 2 years to get those flying cars in action. There's a great movie that not a lot of people have seen called Outland. It's a Sean Connery sci-fi movie, and it's basically High Noon. In fact, it's exactly High Noon, set in a mining camp on one of the moons of Jupiter. That was interesting. The original Alien was a great movie, and Aliens, the second one, is my favorite film by a wide margin. It's not the greatest movie ever made, it's just my favorite. And that is a gritty kind of a future that's a little nasty. No one's ever done a future where capitalism reigns supreme. I may have to do that myself, because it's just not possible for them to get that around their heads. It's either, you know, it's a totalitarian future where the company runs everything, or they don't talk about government at all. It's a, you know, maybe it's a dystopia, but it's not. No one's ever done a world where capitalism is good and happy, everybody's working and getting paid. I've often thought about this, you know. I'm a big defender of capitalism, needless to say, and there's an old statement about government, you know. I think it was Winston Churchill who said democracy is the worst form of government known to man, except for all the others. You can kind of make that case about capitalism. It's the worst economic system in the world, except for all the others. I don't see many disadvantages to capitalism, but there are some. First of all, the name capitalism is not a good name. It was apparently, somebody told me not too long ago, it was invented by the Marxists. To make it something that sounded like it was out of reach, you had to be big fat moneybags guy, big fat guy with a top hat and a vest and a gold watch on a chain, and you had to hold up two big fat bags of money, then you could be a capitalist. So the idea that you could never, you know, just get into the game just by working hard, that was what they wanted you to believe, but it's utter nonsense. You know, it'd be kind of cool to do that. Somebody just mentioned 2001, which is obviously on the back wall back there. The hardware in 2001 is fantastic, and one of the reasons that the hardware in 2001 looks so good is two things that they had going for them. First of all, well, one thing that they had going for them was really the same thing. They made the movie before computer graphics came along. Now, that meant that the models that they used had to be fantastic. And if you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey today, it holds up so well. That ship still looks better than anything I've ever seen on the screen. The original Discovery, the full-scale Discovery, I want to say was 12 or 14 feet long. It was absolutely enormous. And this is something that you probably, it's why I'm happy to do this show business show. There are people who give you probably a better explanation about this. Oh, that doesn't seem likely. There's a reason that model was so big. They wanted it that big. Stanley Kubrick wanted it that big so that he could get all of the little detail on there. Those little, what's the word? Is it squeebles? No. Greebles, something like that. There's a word for these little boxes and little conduits and tubes. Greelies? Something like that. And there's something in CG and also in models. But Kubrick and Discovery and the models in 2001 were the first models that I'm aware of that used very, very small little details to give you an impression of the scale of the thing. So you'd see little boxes, little ribs, boxes, you know, fan vents, ducts, all this other stuff. And it broke up the surface, because otherwise the lunar lander thing, the Ares, would be, I'm sorry, the Orion, no, the Ares, would be just a sphere. It would look like a toy. But because it put so many little details on it, little handhold things and boxes and vents, it tricked the eye into thinking that it was real because it had detail on the surface. And And that was a first. So the model work in 2001 means that those things hold up forever. I get so easily distracted. The reason Discovery was so big was they wanted to pack it full of those little details. But the problem was, this is a depth of field issue. And some of you know about cameras, understand this, but others of you don't. See if I can explain this as clearly as I can. If I have a 1 foot long model or a 5 foot long model or even a 12 foot long model, let's just say a 12 foot long model, and I hold up an iPhone and I take a picture of it, the front of it may be in focus or the back of it will be in focus, at least with a traditional camera, but not all of it will be in focus because it's right in front of you. It's 12 feet away from your face or your eye, or it's 10 feet away or whatever, 5 feet away. And so the front of the ship is much closer to you than the back of the ship. Now, when you take in a picture of the Queen Mary at sea, let's say, coming towards you at sea, the Queen Mary may be a mile or two away, and it's only a fraction of a mile long. Because you're looking at it with a long lens, with a telescopic lens or with binoculars, or when your eye is focused on it like that and kind of looking at the thing like that, it basically means that the front of the ship and the back of the ship are both in focus at the same time. If you look at the Queen Mary standing right next to it, the front's in focus, or the back is, depending on what your eye's doing. But if the Queen Mary is a couple miles away at sea, or a mile away, or some distance away, it's all at far focus, so the back of the ship and the front of the ship are both in focus at the same time. That's what you have to remember. Now, the way to achieve that in film, when you had film in cameras, was you had to have a very, very, very high f-stop. You had to really squeeze that camera lens down, the iris down almost to a pinhole. And that gave you that deep focus. But the problem was the camera aperture is now so small to get that deep focus that you need incredibly long exposure times. And they would do exposures of like almost a minute or something. It's an incredible long time to have an iris open. They just did stop motion, just controlled it. And just moving along, and it's like long frame times, but man, it looked great. And the other reason the 2001 stuff looks so good is because their displays, their cockpit displays, were not done with computer graphics. They were hand-drawn. It's just barely possible to see the bottom one right there. That's nothing but the two guys in the front of the Orion cockpit, and they've got that boxes, rotating boxes. I watched that a couple days ago, and it still looks great. And it looks great because it was hand-drawn. All of it was hand-drawn, and I think it was drawn by some Disney guys. And it looks great because it's so finely detailed. Ironically and pathetically, several years after 2001 was 1968, so this might have been around 88, 89, 90, 88, 89 seems about right. So 10 years after 2001 comes out, 2010 comes out. And the models looked okay in 2010, but they had computer graphics by then. They had like Apple IIc computer graphics. And they went from these beautiful, elegant diagrams to these blocky, heavily aliased, god-awful, chunky, rotten, nasty computer graphics, and it looked incredibly primitive, and it was dated. By the time the movie came out, it was dated. They used real computer graphics, so it looked like crap. So we don't want to get into the space so much as kind of stray on the artistic side for this tonight, but that's an interesting thing. By the way, a little point, but an important point. For those people who appreciate the details, 2001, if you look at the screen displays, just watch the movie and look at the screen displays, you're going to see that sometimes HAL would have like 12 or 16 panels right in front of a HAL station. And if you look at these panels, they're all animated, they're all in motions, they're all graphs, they're all equations, not just nonsense stuff running up there. It's actual equations, orbital dynamics, and bell curves and all that other stuff. But the thing that impressed me the most was that each one of the displays was broken down into a number of categories. There were at least 6 or 7. And one of them was, and each one of them had a 3-letter identifier. So HIB would be for hibernation, and it had a certain color. So all the hibernation displays would say HIB in the corner. And NAV, I think, for nav, NUC for nuke, probably for the nuclear reactor. It was so well thought out, incredibly well thought out. And a little inside story in 2001, because we get off the rails, but that's what the show's all about, is getting off the rails. The movie was shot in England at the big studios over there, and they had hired a guy to be the mission controller, hired a British guy to be the mission controller, and they had an Air Force tech advisor on the show, and this guy could not get it right. He couldn't get it right. Finally, Kubrick had to move mountains, and I mean, this was apparently a big deal. It wasn't trivial. It took him weeks and weeks and weeks. but he finally got permission to get the actual guy to come in and do it on camera. He might have had to get him into the British Actors Union or something like that. But the guy on the other end of the Discovery transmissions is an actual Air Force controller. And even to me, and I listen to this kind of talk all the time, it seems way over the top, but it's like, he's like, Roger, X-Ray Delta 1, this is Mission Control. Roger, your plans for your Alpha Echo 35 unit. Sorry about that, fellas. It's a little over the top, but sounds good. Yeah, 2010 was garbage. 2001 was classic. That's why I have 2001 on the back wall there. Anyway, enough of that. Thanks, Zach. Good to hear from you. Patrick Dillon wants to know, he says, you're given a $50 million budget to remake, update a movie, one that was first released at least 30 years ago. Which one do you pick? Let me think. Thank God. We just made it. If you'd asked me this question, I think I would have missed it. I would remake Buckaroo Banzai. I want to remake that movie so bad. I want to make it so much. And I kind of am. Big Bat Problems is basically Buckaroo Banzai's attitude anyway. The thing I like so much about Buckaroo Banzai was just the competence of it and the ability to take guys who were nuclear physicists and brain surgeons and make them cool. And the way they made them cool was really pretty simple. Well, they had great casting, first of all. Peter Weller when he was young, and I don't think Jeff Goldblum was cool, but Jeff Goldblum was so nerdy he actually became cool. He was dressed up in his stupid, cowboy outfit. But Buckaroo Banzai was about extremely capable, very capable people who were not only brain surgeons and rocket scientists, but they were also rock and roll musicians. And they were dressed in the height of 80s fashion, which dates it a little bit today because they were such a statement. But that the greatest credits of all time is in Buckaroo Banzai. If you haven't seen him yet, go to YouTube when we're done and watch Buckaroo Banzai end credits. I think Good Version is the one that says Good Version on it. It's just killer. And these guys are in incredibly fashionable clothes. And even today they looks like 80 clothes, but they look like killer 80 clothes. Really great. And each one of them had their own specialty, and there's a lot of that in Big Bad Problems. The reason I'd want to make Buckaroo Banzai again is because it's just so interesting. And they didn't have a lot of money to do it the first time around. But you could do so much more with the alien invasion, and not to give away too much of Big Bad Problems, but the thing I would do if I remade Buckaroo Banzai would be to do what I'm going to do in Big Bad Problems, which is I'm going to include everything in the universe that works today and is practical. I don't want CG gadgets, because I think I have a whole conversation. I mean, we really could do 3 hours about CG. Maybe we should. But what I've come to... look, I'm a guy who used to have a computer graphics company. I mean, I did computer graphics effects back in the early to mid-'90s. And I'm a big fan of them. But when people depend on them, you get the Star Wars trilogy, right? You get the Phantom Menace and the Attack of the Clones, this antiseptic, silly, not real universe. And you get tires that come right by the camera. You never get that shot in real life. And so when somebody gives you a tire coming right by the camera, or a jet that flies 6 inches away from you or something, and the director's like idiots saying, that's really exciting. No. It takes you out of the movie. You may not even know you're being taken out of the movie, but you know that shot can't be real because jets can't get that close to the camera. So, in any event, I just think that I want practical stuff. And there's a website out there which you may not know about, and I can't believe I haven't said it earlier. It's really fun. It's called DudeIWantThat.com. DudeIWantThat.com has got all kinds of really cool little gadgets, all sorts of weird stuff, incredible weapons, including a personal flamethrower. And so this Big Bad Problems has got flamethrowers, personal flamethrowers, and it's got these pump-action shotguns, and there's like a hunting knife, just a regular knife, little hole in the tip, and there's a little CO2 cartridge that goes in the handle. When you stab somebody, then you push the button, and it blows the CO2 cartridge and blows them up. Stuff like that is just neat, and it's got to be practical because it's got to look real. And if it's not real, if you've got some kind of electronic CG kind of thing, like a tricorder or something, then you're not in a real movie anymore. There's so much cool stuff out there. It's like the world is coming to an end, but it's going to end with cool gear. The thing that I'm interested in is there's just so much neat tech. You got this room, this boarded up house full of these bats, and they know they're in there. And instead of, walking in there and taking their casualties, they just chuck one of these little Brookstone, little tracked vehicles or little wheeled vehicles, and they're steering it with their iPhone, and they're watching the TV image coming back on their iPhone, and they got drones, doing surveillance of the back windows. It's just cool. It's just neat. And I want to put as much of that in there. So if I were to do the Buckaroo Banzai thing again, I would have these guys be masters of tech. They'd be jamming signals. They'd have apps. They'd have everything. I'd get it right up to the present day, and I'd really have a lot of fun with it. So that's be what the movie I could remake after the last 30 years. So anyway, yeah, that was cool. Hey, quick question in between questions here. For the first time ever, my Chrome ad block is not working. It's been working for a year, at least a year, maybe more, and suddenly I'm getting commercials. I don't know if anybody else is having that problem. I wonder if somehow Ustream found a way to defeat it, but yeah, I'm getting commercials and I don't like them. So anyway, maybe it just needs an update. Maybe the plugin needs an update. So that's that, Patrick. Thank you. Moving on. Paul Sullivan says, I hear rumors of secret cult of conservative actors in Hollywood. Is there such a group of people that must move in the shadows to avoid the gaze of the Eye of Sauron? Is there a group of conservatives in Hollywood? No. That's a rumor, and there's no truth to it whatsoever. Aloe Conson asks, how do we go about converting or weakening the uber-influential leftists who run the entertainment industry? I don't think you can, Aloe. I don't think you can. It's kind of like saying, how do you use your outboard motor to turn the Titanic away from the iceberg? There's just not enough force, not enough leverage. There's not enough vector on it. So I think the reason I answer that way is to say you can't think about changing Hollywood. You can't think about moving Hollywood. You have to think about flanking Hollywood. You have to think about parallel structures. You have to think about a parallel Hollywood, because that giant thing over there is not going to change. They're in too deep. One of the really ironic things, is Avengers. I haven't seen the new Avengers movie, but everything that Joss Whedon writes, I like very much. I loved the first Avengers movie, and I loved Firefly and Serenity. So everything he writes, I love. Everything he says, I can't stand. I just can't stand. That's an interesting thing. Jeremy Boring points this out. He says when he's writing, he's a libertarian conservative, because that's actually what he believes. I don't think you can write this stuff and not believe it, because writing comes from the heart of hearts. But when he speaks like a gigantic progressive, and it's because the culture expects that, and he wants to be seen to be a good guy. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's earned every penny of it. But for a political philosophy that demonizes wealth, the president just a day or two ago said, if you have $300,000, that's more than anybody could ever need, or their families. I had a little thought coming up in the elevator earlier today. I really thought, if I had a chance to ask Barack Obama a question from a crowd, let's say, I'd say, Mr. President, I just want to tell you what a special opportunity it is for me to speak to you, because you are, in fact, the first of a kind. You really have been a trendsetter here, sir. You really are the first of a kind. There's never been another president like you. We've never, ever, ever had a communist in the White House before, but you're the first. So let me just ask you this. So this guy who flies in his own 747 is telling people that they can't, if you make $300,000 more money that you could ever use or need. What does he know? He's never made a dime in his life, ever. He just, anyway. So you can't really change this. These people are so deep into this philosophy. Joss Whedon, he has to say the things he does because he wants to fit in, and he believes it. I'm not saying he doesn't believe it. But when you leave him alone and you give him a chance to make something interesting, he comes up with the characters in Firefly, and he comes up with Captain America saying God doesn't dress that way, or there's only one God, or whatever. He says things that are heroic and big because it's a heroic and big philosophy. And this is a larger point that I think I'm going to save till later, because I think there's a question pretty much on it. But he's a perfect example of this. George Clooney is. All these guys make their living by portraying guys with guns, and and they're all anti-gun, and it's this giant sort of cognitive dissonance where a guy like Alec Baldwin, who is a complete raving lunatic and not a nice guy, got a lot of fame and a lot of truly justified kudos for playing a super conservative guy, and he did it beautifully. He's interesting. That guy's interesting, and he's an interesting character. Jack something or other on back on 30 Rock. So, it's you can't change Hollywood. You can just flank it. Now, as it turns out, Clint Eastwood is one of the few people who, if there was a secret society of conservatives in Hollywood, he'd be one of the people that was in it. But there isn't, so he's not. Clint is a force of nature. Clint doesn't have to worry about what people think. Clint doesn't have to worry about being tarred as a conservative. Clint Eastwood is one of the greatest directors who ever lived. He's a legend, an actual legend, and everybody wants to work with him, including Sean Penn and Matt Damon and all the rest. So if Clint Eastwood wants to make a movie that's very conservative, he'll get Bradley Cooper. So with the exception of one or two people like that who are big up there, Bruckheimer's one of them. He's a fairly conservative guy. But with that exception of one or two of these kind of forces of nature, you're not going to get Hollywood to change. So you just have to go out and make movies that do better. I was talking with a guy, Bear, Dr. Bear, not too long ago. He does a movie guide and really does great work. And he basically ranks movies and looks at their box office and stuff. And he said, I think he said it was some incredible number, some really incredible number. It's like of the top 20 movies or 30 or 50 or something, not one of the top grossing movies was an anti-American movie. He said the ones that do well are the ones with the pro-American, pro-Christian, pro-conservative themes. They're the ones that do big business. And you get things like Redacted and Lions for Lambs. They don't even make the catering budget. They don't make a day's catering budget back. And they just keep making them because of their ideology. So, as I've said before, Aloe, the thing you need to understand about this business is they don't care if they make any money. That may not sound like it makes sense to you, but you have to understand how Hollywood works these days. It's like this. Jeremy makes another interesting point. That's a smart kid. Don't tell him I said so. But Jeremy said that we got into trouble culturally when the antitrust legislation back, I guess, in the 30s or 40s, used to be that a studio like Paramount owned the studio, and they also owned large strings of Paramount theaters, and people were going to the movies 3, 4, 5 times a week back in the 30s and 40s. And Jeremy's point was when the studios owned the theaters, then the revenue that the studios took in was based upon making the American people happy. If you were making movies that the American people didn't want to see, then they wouldn't go to your movie theaters. And if they didn't go to your movie theaters, you had no revenue to make more movies. So even though there were a huge number of leftists in the 30s and 40s and 50s and so on, huge numbers, they had to make pro-American movies in order to keep working. When the Supreme Court ruled that this was an antitrust violation, and the movie theaters were divorced from the studios had to look someplace for the revenues, since they couldn't just take it directly from the theaters. They had, obviously, revenues would come to them through theaters, but through a distribution company. And when the studio system was more or less destroyed, what happened was they went through all the private donors and all the guys who were rich, and they got burned badly enough. Then all of a sudden, foreign donors started stepping up. Nowadays, films are financed completely by China or UAR or UAE, rather, or Dubai. And, not only can you not make a movie that's critical of China, but if you make one that's critical of China, China will put enough pressure on it for you to have to go back and redo the special effects in the movie and make it North Korea. And so what happens is Hollywood is not, the money comes from somewhere else. And given the accounting practices in Hollywood, which in any other business in the world, would land everybody in prison for the rest of their lives, this foreign money comes in, and everybody gets paid up front. The reason a film costs 50, 60, 70, 80 million, $200 million is not just because of the special effects. It's because Tom Cruise is getting $20, $30 million up front. And the reason he's getting up front is because there is no back end. I was on a set. I watched Ed Norton when the director of the studio who did the executive in charge of the studio that did Fight Club accidentally revealed, just in an offhand manner, that Fight Club DVDs were going through the roof. And Ed Norton turned to him and said, "Oh, really?" Well, when I say go through the roof, I mean that they're doing well relative to the market, but the market is very badly suppressed. Peter Gruber says, looks like somebody owes somebody a check. Ed Norton could not get royalties from Fight Club because of the accounting, and my understanding was, if it's changed recently, that the Tolkien estate was told that they didn't have any money. They weren't going to get paid because the Lord of the Rings movies, which made $4 billion with a B, weren't profitable. So the accounting is crap. So everybody takes their money up front. That's why the movies cost so much. There is no back end. Everybody gets the movie up front. And since everybody's already been paid, this is the point. Since everybody's already been paid and not likely to see any more money, they don't care if nobody goes to see it in America. They'll go see it overseas, and even if they don't care. They've got their paychecks. They're going home. They've made enough money to live on for 5 years. And that's how it works. So once you understand that, it's not about the money. People talk about, we're going to boycott Hollywood. They don't care. As long as China and Dubai and Saudi Arabia and all the rest of these foreign financiers don't boycott Hollywood, then they don't care. And as Jeremy pointed out very succinctly, he really hit the nail right on the head with this one. A Hollywood director would rather go to a Hollywood party with a film that bombed at the box office but still stuck it to the man and stuck it to George Bush and stuck it to those knuckle-dragging conservatives out there in flyover country. He'd rather be that guy than a guy who comes into the party with $400 million profit on a film that, celebrated conservative values or even American values, pro-American movie. He'd be laughed out of the room. That's how it works. So, it's really just that simple. Sorry, I just had this flash. I got a bad plug-in and it just crashed, and I just have to restart it so I can see that I'm getting a picture, because if we don't have a picture, then we're in trouble. So that's the story, and that's how it works. So as I said, Aloe, it's not that you can change Hollywood. I think it's a waste of time and effort to change Hollywood. I think the answer is to make movies independent of Hollywood. And the good news in all this is the cost of production has gone down so much. I've got, for $10,000 here, I've got the ability to cut feature films. And for another $10,000, I could get an Ursa, Blackmagic Ursa, which is shoot 4.5K camera, and shoot feature films. Really, $10,000, $12,000 will do it. You don't have to pay for lab fees anymore. You don't have to do any of it. You're just shooting 4K feature film quality stuff, and it's a data recorder. It's not a camera. Eisenfire was telling me what the thing is. It's like 14 f-stops, 16, 20, something like that. It's insane how much information. You can just go out and turn it on, take it back to the studio, and have the colorist fix it. So anyway, there you go. That's the problem, and any effort to try and change it is like trying to row the Titanic out of trouble. It's like getting in a lifeboat and rowing as hard as you can to change the course. The answer is to get into the lifeboats and row away from the Titanic, because the Titanic is going down. There's nothing you can do to bail the Titanic once it hits that iceberg, and it's already hit it. So there you go. I have two questions that are closely related here, so I grouped them together. I'll just read them both. Kevin Jordan asks, is society's obsession with the anti-hero, Batman, Shaft, anyone who ever played by Clint Eastwood, a commentary on the degradation of society as a whole? The only way to achieve true justice is to exit the restrictions of a corrupt society. And Bradley Hope says, why have the stories changed where we used to root for the good guy, White Hat, and now the story wants us to root for the bad guy, Black Hat? Breaking Bad is the best example of this, but there are many others. Why do I like the anti-hero more than the hero? That's a great question, because that's really it. Why do I like the anti-hero more than the hero? I think if you're going to address this problem, you have to understand that I like the anti-hero better than the hero too. At least in the case of how it was traditionally done. Now, American Sniper scared the daylights out of the Hollywood left, because it was a hero that you not only could like, but that you actually just loved. You just loved the guy. You loved what he did. You loved the sacrifices he made. You got to see the price he was paying for protecting all of us, and the fact that he wasn't conflicted about going out there and shooting bad guys. And when you asked, how do you feel when you pull the trigger on, what do you feel when you pull the trigger on a terrorist? Recoil, that kind of guy. Terrified them because Kyle in American Sniper is not an anti-hero. He's a hero, and he's an attractive hero, and people loved him, and that's deadly dangerous to the left. But you have to understand the history of the anti-hero and where the anti-hero idea came from, and it's not without justification. If you look back in the late 50s, maybe early 60s, Clint Eastwood, tough guy, awesome anti-hero Clint Eastwood, was in a movie, I think he was in Paint Your Wagon, wasn't he? Somebody's going to correct me in a second. Pretty sure he was. But you got to remember what they were making back then, Oklahoma and Paint Your Wagon and 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, and, just this, the music, man, and just this pap. Some of these are good films, I guess, if you like that kind of stuff, but they're, Doris Day, honestly, Doris Day, leading American movie star, is there anybody more bland than Doris Day? So it was boring. It wasn't like it was in the 30s and even in the 40s. It was just boring. And how many westerns, we were talking about the Wilhelm Scream. I mean, how many westerns did they make in Hollywood? Thousands? Thousands? You can only do this so many times. So the reason the anti-hero started to get a little traction is because when you had movies like, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers or Paint Your Wagon or Music Man, and along comes Easy Rider, it's like, what? What? What the hell is this? This is different. This is interesting, and especially for young people, it's cool. It's rebellious. Rebellion is what it's all about. Rebellion is an American trait. We're wired for rebellion. We're here because of a rebellion, and Hollywood had gotten so mainstream and so conservative in the worst sense of the word. Just conservative in movies, not about conservative principles, just not taking any risks at all. You look at some of these historical dramas, and they're lit in a studio. It's like just this genuine, bloody, awful kind of wall of light, wall of sound. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. So of course the anti-hero came out, and I think there's a much more. That's part of it, and I think it's also interesting to understand this. A lot of people are saying Outlaw Josie Wales, definite anti-hero, and the man, the man. What did they call Clint Eastwood in the spaghetti westerns? The man who, the silent man, or the man who didn't speak, something like that. So I think I got a question coming up about whether I pick Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. I'm pretty sure I take it. I'm going to take it now. I want to make sure I give credit to the person who asked it. Here it is. Kevin Jordan is the last question I wrote, but I'm going to take it right now. Clint Eastwood or John Wayne? Kevin Jordan asks. Clint Eastwood, man. I mean, John Wayne's a legend, but Clint Eastwood in a barrel. I don't want to ever be on record as saying anything bad about John Wayne. I mean, John Wayne. There apparently was an actual attempt by Stalin to assassinate John Wayne because John Wayne was America. And I don't want to say anything bad about the guy. And now I'm about to say something, derogatory about the guy, but I mean no reflection on John Wayne, who truly is one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. But John Wayne can't act. John Wayne's not an actor. John Wayne maybe did a little acting in Rooster Cogburn or what was that one they just remade? Hate it when my mind just goes. True Grit. He was okay in that, but he's not. He's not the man with no name. Thanks, guys. But he's not a great actor. Now, Clint Eastwood is a great actor. Clint Eastwood is a great actor. You watch him in Unforgiven or Gran Torino, and he's a great actor. But it's not just a question of the chops of Clint Eastwood versus John Wayne. If you have an anti-hero, let's take Unforgiven, for example, versus somebody in Stagecoach or Fort Apache or John Wayne movie or something like that. All John Wayne has to do is be heroic and brave. What Clint Eastwood has to do is he has to be heroic and brave and hate it at the same time. And that's much more interesting. It's much, much, much more interesting to watch. There's kind of a crossover, sort of a middle thing with the Gary Cooper character in High Noon, because that character is a hero. There's no question he's a hero. I think he's the greatest hero ever, frankly. I think the Gary Cooper character in High Noon is the greatest heroic story ever written. But he's not happy, and he's not getting the support he needs, and he's not pleased about it. And you get the feeling he wants to run away. So that's interesting. That's interesting. It's just much more interesting. An anti-hero is not the same as the villain. That's an important distinction to make. One of the things about the villain is that the villain arrives fully fleshed and the villain doesn't change. This is just elementary screenwriting. It's elementary storytelling. The villain arrives fully formed and he doesn't change. And since he doesn't change, in so many cases the villain is much more interesting than the protagonist, especially if the story's told well. Darth Vader, when he comes through that open mouth of hell, he's pretty much Darth Vader. He doesn't really change. At the very end of the third movie he changes, but through 3 movies he's just an evil force of death and murder. Luke Skywalker, on the other hand, starts out as nothing. Luke Skywalker is a whiny crybaby kid. He's just a little baby. I want to go to sky. I want to go fly. Well, you don't get to do that, Luke. You got to go to another year out on the moisture farm. And he just whines and cries his way through the movie, and Luke Skywalker doesn't get interesting until the second movie, when he starts to take some loss and feel some pain. And then finally in the third movie, Luke Skywalker transcends character. He's the only guy who transcends his character. When Luke Skywalker throws that lightsaber down the pit in the third movie, he becomes a greater person than becomes a greater person than Han Solo, and a greater person than Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a more interesting person than Han Solo. If you were to say that at the first movie, so this is a giant arc, and I'll get back to this in a minute, but if you look at the Star Wars trilogy as one movie with a big arc, a character arc, that has to happen to the protagonist. And you can't have the protagonist start out as the king, as the transcendent character, because he hasn't gone anywhere. So you actually have to artificially lower your protagonist and make him just this piece of putty. So when you watch the first movie, the first Star Wars movie, you see Luke, and it's like, what's Luke? He's a good-looking kid. He's a nothing burger. Han is the guy. Han Solo, like the villain, doesn't change. He softens a little bit, but he always had the heart of gold. So he's a rogue, and he's an adventurer, and he's interesting, and he's dramatic, and he's sexy. He's all these other things. And he comes in fully formed, and you think, oh, Han Solo is 100 times the character that Luke Skywalker is. But Han Solo doesn't change. In the third movie, Luke transcends humanity in a way. He becomes the Jedi. He becomes the God. He becomes the king. He becomes the king because he threw away power. Same thing with Aragorn. Aragorn, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he starts out as a dusty vagabond living in a pit. He's in a corner at this bar in Bree, at this tavern, and he's a shadowy figure. Nobody knows anything about him. And over time, we begin to realize that he is destined for greatness, but he doesn't want any part of it. He's afraid. He's afraid of what he's really afraid of. He's afraid of the same thing that Luke is afraid of. He's afraid he's going to become his father and screw things up. So, Luke and Aragorn, the same characters. They start out artificially low, so that over the course of the 3-movie arc, they change. And they both change the same way. They have to step up and assume the responsibility of their noble birth. Because Aragorn was born to be the king, and Luke was born to be a Jedi. They just didn't know it. And they have to make a decision, and they have to make that decision when things are down, not when things are up. When things are at the dark night of the soul, they have to step up and do the right thing. And in those two cases, and also in the case of Arthur, all three with swords, all three with father who failed. It's the same story, you see. Star Wars is the same story of Lord of the Rings, the same story as Arthur. To some degree, it's the same story as Superman. You've got, in the case of Arthur, and the case of Luke Skywalker, and the case of Aragorn, people who were raised on farms away from the spotlight because they were of noble birth, who didn't know it and didn't want it, and over time they suffer the hardships and they take the losses. And at the dark night of the soul, they fear that they're going to be their fathers and screw up so badly that the entire kingdom goes to ruin. But at the very end, they transcend their fathers, not by becoming mighty in battle, not because they slaughtered thousands where father couldn't slaughter thousands. They transcend themselves and become the king by throwing away power, by walking away from power. Luke throws his lightsaber into the pit. I'm a Jedi like my father. You're never going to turn me. Arthur throws Excalibur back into the lake. Aragorn takes the ring, which would make him invincible, and puts it back in Frodo's hand and says, I'm always here for you. I've always been here for you and always will be here for you. They walk away from power, and that's what allows them to become the king. That's what makes them noble enough to become the king. They're ready to give it up. They want to give it up. So, your hero, it's easy to make a hero a bad hero. It's very much harder to make a hero interesting. But they did it in those 3 movies, and we're going to talk about this downstream a little bit more when we start talking about story elements. Downstream, either in this episode or in the next one. But heroes can't be John Wayne, at least traditional John Wayne. John Wayne put more nuance into his characters as he got older. But he can't be the guy who always does right. He can't be the guy who's always dependable. because it's not interesting. And one of the great defects as a writer that most writers have, I certainly had it forever. When I had my key characters, my main characters, the characters who I liked, the people who were the voice of me, I wanted them to be right all the time, and I wanted them to be noble all the time, and I wanted them to stand up, and I wanted them to be cool, and I wanted them to win and succeed. And that's just not interesting. It's not interesting. Setbacks are interesting. Overcoming obstacles are interesting. I didn't want to hurt my own people that way, but you have to learn how to do it. I probably mentioned this once before, but I got into a discussion a long time ago with my acting professor, who I learned so much from, a guy named David Shelton, who taught at the University of Florida. And he was worried, this would be like the maybe early 80s. And just then you start to get into some of this interactive. All right, so we're back. Hopefully most of you are still there, 140 people. I'm just trying to figure out if somebody can let me know what I said last, and I'll just pick it up from there. I know I was talking about the arc of the it's the journey of the hero, really. Anybody want to let me know what I was saying last? This one wasn't my fault. This one just happened. Just got bit. Anyway, I guess we can probably just wrap up this thing, because I've been down this road a little bit before. But just to conclude, the anti-hero is a response to the boringness of the simple hero, the straightforward guy who never. I remember what I was saying. This theater professor of mine named David Shelton was worried that with interactive technology and computers and so on, he was worried that audiences would be able to write the movie just by having people vote. Because he did a couple experimental films like that. You get to a point where you have a plot point or a crisis, then you got to pick whether you wanted A or B or C or whatever the case was. And he was worried that would take over and that there wouldn't be a need for writers anymore. And I just said, listen, that's never going to happen, David, because if you have a sympathetic character in a movie theater and you've got 400 people watching the guy, and there comes a conflict, and the conflict means the guy can either go and have something good happen to him or something bad happen to him, he will pick the good thing every time. The audience will pick the good thing to happen. They don't want him to cheat on his wife. They don't want him to break his leg in a crash. They don't want him to do any of these things. And so what they'll do is the audience will protect the hero because they like him, and by protecting him, then they make him not interesting. And that's kind of what the whole John Wayne thing was. John Wayne as an archetype. He's just not as interesting as a guy who's conflicted. And that's the way it is. So you have to, as a writer, you have to have the discipline and the understanding that the dirtier you make this hero, and I say dirty, I don't mean immoral necessarily. I'm not saying you want to make him a bad guy, but the more mud he has to slog through, and the more hardships he has to endure, and the more loss he takes, despite the fact you don't want the guy to take any loss, the more of that he goes through and comes through on the other side, the better that he's going to be as a character, the more people are going to like him. Just requires discipline, just like anything else. So, yeah, that's what I would say about that. And I don't have to be anywhere tonight, so we're going to go a little bit longer. What are we? I can't keep track now. We're 3 minutes into the second segment. But there's no second segment because it's fixed in the editing. So moving on. Mark O'Malley asks, why can't anybody, anywhere, anyone write and film a decent pornographic love story? I couldn't get past 10 pages of 50 Shades. That's an interesting question. For those of you who are having problems with the video, you might want to refresh your browsers if you're hearing me but not seeing me. We had a restart in here, and it just kind of happens sometimes. So why can't they make a good, pornographic movie or something, a major movie? I guess what you're really saying is, why can't they put sex into a major movie and have it work? There's an actual reason for that. And the reason is that pornography is the antithesis of romance. And when they've done studies on this, kind of studies where they had people hooked up to sensors, that kind of thing. And that when you would have a couple going out on a date or something, if there was romance in the movie, the guy'd be like, yeah, okay, and the women be over the moon. But when they started showing too much skin, when the sex got graphic, in fact, when the sex really started at all, when they really started to see like actual sex, even if you weren't showing anything, even if it was just like R movie sex or even PG movie sex, people started to get more uncomfortable. And the more graphic the sex became, the more uncomfortable people got across the spectrum. across the spectrum. That's why pornography is watched by yourself or maybe with the company of the the person you're with, but you watch it in private. People don't like to watch sexual activity on a screen in front of other people. It makes them extremely uncomfortable. At least Americans that way, thank God. I don't have any problem with either of these things, frankly. I'm all about freedom and all that other stuff, and pornography has its place and all the rest. But you can't make a pornographic movie romantic, and you can't make a romantic movie pornographic, because they're opposite of each other. I'm not dumb enough to say that you couldn't make a movie where you had a good love story and believable characters and loving characters and people you cared about. Forget about their relationship. You just cared about interesting characters. You just had that. But once they start making out, people start getting nervous, and once the clothes come off, they start to get pretty nervous, and once actual sex starts, they get very nervous, and the more graphic the sex is, the more nervous they become. And that's why it didn't work. I don't know how 50 Shades did in theaters. I just don't have any idea. My guess is it didn't do anything like expectations, because the book works because, you can see women reading these books on the New York subway system, and they're in their own private world and don't have to share it with anybody. When you start getting that stuff on the screen, it doesn't work. Showgirls was one of the greatest catastrophes of all time, and all of these things fail. They fail terribly, and they're just not something you want to go and sit in a room with either your date or with other people around, and that's why it doesn't work, I think. I don't think it can work. I don't think it's a question of technique or storytelling. I just think it's antithetical to... one is antithetical to the other. You make a good porno movie, which needs to be watched either in private or with a very special person who you love very much. Or you can make a romance that everybody's going to enjoy in a movie theater, but the more you cross from one to the other, the more you start bailing on your original idea, and the grosser and weirder it gets. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Jacob Belchak wants to know, has Snark replaced general humor in entertainment? So what do you want, Jacob? You want everybody to do like Paint Your Wagon? Is that it? I mean, is that it? You're just a little worried that somebody says something funny or offbeat or kind of hilarious or ironic, and your head just explode? Is that just more than you can take? Is that what you're trying to say? I mean, God knows I'd hate to have you get all excited or upset about some actual humor in a show. I mean, my God, you want to have that happen, something to change your perspective or your viewpoint or anything. God forbid that should happen. No, by all means, stay in your little closeted world where everything's cool, and Doris Day, we'll see if we can, reanimate her corpse and get her up there on the screen, and, you have all the boring, non-snarky humor you want. There, you satisfied? Happy with that? See how awful it is and how easy it is? Snark is cowardice. And Comedy Central, Daily Show, all of it. Colbert Report. It's nothing but snark. And snark is dull. And it's lame. And it's easy. And it's one note. And it's not humor. It's nastiness. And the people that live on a diet of snark are people who are nasty people, and they like making fun of people. And so when you have somebody like Jon Stewart and all the special segments on Daily Show or Colbert, what they're basically saying, see how much smarter we are than these knuckle draggers out there. See how much better we are. We're going to pretend to be them just to show you how stupid they are, and we're going to mock them, and they're probably too stupid to even know they're being mocked. Every now and then I get off a one-liner that I like, and I was talking about Steve Colbert, and I said, if you're going to be a one-trick pony, you better know the trick, right? And that's all he does. Now, there was a time there in the early days of The Daily Show when Steve Colbert and Steve Carell were both on at the same time. They did a segment called Even Steven, I want to say. When you saw Steve Carell and Steve Colbert in the same frame doing their stuff, you couldn't watch Steve Colbert if Steve Carell was in the same frame, because Steve Carell was 1,000 times more interesting and 1,000 times funnier, because Steve Carell has a soul. He's a nice guy. I know people who know him personally. He's a nice man. I don't know what his politics is. Good for him. He doesn't tell us what his politics are. Steve Carell has a soul. Steve Carell has depth. He has emotion. His vulnerability is what it is, right? His vulnerability is the difference between that and snark. And he's an infinitely funnier, infinitely more likable person than Steve Colbert. Snark is cowardice. It's by showing you're so much better than everybody, and especially by showing I don't care. I don't really care about anything. It's all truthiness. Well, since you don't have to care, you don't have to take any criticism, right? And if you take a serious position, you have to be prepared to defend it. And you either have to have the emotional and the intellectual chops to defend it. So it's easy, and it's cowardice. Snark is cowardice, and it appeals to people who have a mean spirit. And that's why when people say, "Oh, you hear this all the time." Aesop's Retreat says Snark is an insult dressed in a smile. It's a pretty good definition, actually. But you hear this all the time. Why doesn't the right do a daily show? Why don't conservatives do their own daily show? Can't do the daily show. It's not possible to do the daily show, because in order to do the daily show, you have to make fun of people. You have to put them down. You have to put them down and act like you're better than them. We don't believe that. And even if we force ourselves to do it in terms of writing and character and stuff, we don't like it. We don't need it. We don't need to put people down, and we don't need to laugh at people and mock people to convince ourselves that we're smarter than we are, because we know how smart we are. So when people would say to me, you really, Bill, you might be a good host to do the conservative daily show. It's like, I don't want to do the daily show. I want to flank the daily show. I don't want to go head to head with this. Jon Stewart was doing it since when? I mean, 20 years? It's 20 years old, this idea. It's not funny. It's not funny. Flank it. Do self-deprecating humor, and do the kind of humor that indicates you actually have character and brains, because smart people are not afraid to make fun of their own intellect, because they got nothing to prove to themselves or to anybody else. And just get dressed up instead of do this, barking, mad, howling people in the studio who you never see. I'd put my audience on camera. I'd make them part of the show, and have them get dressed, and I'd be funny, and I'd be a happy warrior, be it, confident, look like money, get dressed. Why are you dressed so well? Out of respect for my audience. Why do you think I'm dressed so well, Mr. President? With your rolled up sleeves and your open collar, and, you can't put a tie on. I don't think I've ever seen you in a tie. I don't see you very often in a tie. Anyway, that's it. I think that's pretty much it. Snark is childish, and it's done. By the way, it's done. Irony is cowardice. Cynicism is cowardice. Snark is cowardice. It's not only cowardly, and it's not only nasty. It's done. It's boring. It's played out. Give me something new. Again, Steve Colbert. It's like, how many years are you going to do the same kind of, okay, you got the eyebrows, fantastic. I've seen it. I've seen it for 10 years, Steve. Got anything else in that box? No. If you're a one-trick pony, you got to know how to do the trick. Christopher Dale Goodwin asks, what actors, directors, and producers do you like despite their progressive stances? Just about all of them. By the way, Cheryl just points out that I said we should mock the other side. I do think we should mock the other side, but I don't think that's really snark. I mean, you call somebody a bunch of weenies. It's not really snark. I'm not sneering at them. I'm just actually kind of standing there with the makeup off saying, why are you guys such jerks? Why do you guys have to be such jerks? That's not snark. Snark would be like, oh, yeah, oh, no, you're a big brain intellectual. I don't have any chance to argue with you. I don't know. A guy like you. No, that's snark. I don't use snark against these people. I just say, you're a control freak weenie. You have a bad haircut. What's wrong with you? That's not snark. That's kind of honesty. So back to that question we just read. What actors, directors, and producers do you like despite their progressive stance? I like virtually all of them. Welcome to the heartbreak of my world. Right? I mean, it's really, really hard to hear Liam Neeson make this idiotic gun comment, because I really like watching him in movies, and I like Matt Damon. I think Matt Damon's a really appealing guy. George Clooney's one of the most appealing guys in the world, and I can't watch his movies anymore. I don't boycott them. I just can't watch them. I think Sean Penn is the greatest actor who ever lived. I think he's certainly in contention for the greatest actor who ever lived. He's a spectacular actor. He's an incredible actor. And every single day he opens his mouth and says something not only contradictory to what I believe, but contradictory to what he believes. Leonardo DiCaprio, fantastic actor, a very sympathetic guy, like everything he's been in. And Leonardo DiCaprio's a environmental lunatic. He flies his private jet to conferences that condemn people for flying private jets. What do you say about this? Nothing. You just have to eat it. And so you just have to eat it. Now, there's some of them I just can't tolerate. There's one or two Michael Moore's not in this category because Michael Moore's not an actor. He's just a polemicist like me. But with very few exceptions, I like almost all of these people. I never liked Barbra Streisand. That's a relief. Charlize Theron is a terrific actress. Stunning. Probably the most beautiful woman ever lived. And she's a gigantic left-wing idiot. And she's been seeing, I don't know if she's still with him, but she's a gigantic love affair with Sean Penn, who's toxic and evil. And now we're going to see what many people are calling the greatest action movie of all time. The new Road Warrior movie looks fantastic. And Charlize Theron is the lead in it, and she's going to be fantastic. She's going to be fantastic in it. And I have to watch it, and then I just have to switch off the fact, which is not really too hard to do, actually, to be honest with you. I can go to a movie and enjoy watching these people, and then they get up and start talking. It's like, oh, okay, got it. Thank you. No, do not want. Bad touch. So I can't list them, honestly. Christopher, I can't list them. There are just too many of them. I like virtually all of them. I don't like Jamie Foxx, and he's a total dick. So that's reassuring. But by and large, no. Even people I used to really like quite a lot, like Morgan Freeman, who I thought would know better, he's coming up with this whole racism thing. It's like, Morgan, honestly, seriously, you're gonna lay this on us too. And by the way, I just had a question I had to answer. Where to go? Hang on a minute. Now I gotta go find it. Just scroll down so fast here. I gotta get the name, because I can't let this stand. Hang on a minute. Not Moose says, Bill, why do you like Titanic? Did someone take your man card? No, they didn't take my man card. When Titanic came out on DVD or digital download, I got the movie, and I just fast forward through the first half of the movie. Probably almost the first. I start watching Titanic when they hit the iceberg. I think the rest of it's just junk. But even so, you had to have something in that junk to give you something to care about. You had to care about one of those people. And when Jack goes under in Titanic, it's a sad moment. I like the kid. But basically, I like Titanic because I've been interested in the Titanic for decades before the movie came out. I always wanted to be there to see it. I think it's one of the great sights in the history of humankind. That would be something to see, being out in the water and watch that ship go down, and Cameron let me do it. And I'm glad we caught that Titanic thing, because I want to say something about Cameron. And Cameron, I see him on his deep sea venture little video. Here's Cameron, who's a Canadian who came to this country, became a multi-millionaire. He's undoubtedly a billionaire. He's certainly, easily, I would imagine, a billionaire. One of the richest men in show business. And all he does is put down capitalism. Here in America, he puts down America and capitalism, and he goes on his special trips to the rainforest. And he starts talking to the actual rainforest people. And he starts speaking them into the language of the Na'vi. As the Na'vi say, I see you. There is no Na'vi, James. The Na'vi don't exist. It's in your head. You just made that up. It's made up speech. And it's this kind of thing, right? I mean, here's a guy who's taking his personal billions to do what I would do if I had billions. I wouldn't go to the bottom of the ocean. I'd go to the moon on my billions of dollars. And he can't just be okay with it. It's all got to be no, capitalism and climate change and blah, 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 blah. So what it is I want all of the benefits of capitalism, but I also want all the benefits of being a socialist douche, which is telling you, I'm a much better, more moral person than you are, and Matt Damon makes a living at this. I think they should raise taxes. Yeah, well, if you think you should raise taxes, Matt, why don't you have Warner Brothers write the check to you instead of your production company? If you want to pay more taxes, that's a way to do it. Hypocrites. They're just hypocrites. They want it both ways. They want it easy. It's moral sainted on the cheap. I believe in diversity. Well, I do too. Doesn't mean I'm going to hire somebody who's not qualified just to achieve it. I believe in peace. I'm against war. Guess what, Matt? I'm the biggest hawk there is. I'm against war too. Every warrior I know is against war. They understand that sometimes it's necessary, and if it's going to be necessary, you ought to be good at it. I don't know anybody who's in favor of war. The hypocrisy of this town's enough to make you crazy. If that wall behind me is the side that Hollywood is on, and it's triply reinforced and got lead back there, because I don't want any of that stuff creeping through the walls. It's just unbelievably toxic and stupid. Joseph Talbot asked the question of the age. This should be tacked on to every studio executive's forehead with a sharp little pointy tack. You print this out and tack it on there. You can take it off when they get the point. Joseph Talbot says, every aspect of movies today have a superfluous amount of talent going to the production except for the scripts. Why? I just had an insight to this just this second, and I think it's because the studio executives, of all the things that studio executives want to be, they want to be directors because directors have got all the glamour and all the power and all the, casting couch and all that other stuff, and they get all the credit and all the other thing. But if I had to really guess, I never thought about this before, not before this very instant, but I bet you that every studio executive out there, the people that approve these movies and the budgets, what they really want to be is writers. I've seen them in action. I've seen them during the notes. That's when you really get to find out what these people are really made out of. I've seen lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of network executives giving notes. Let me tell you something. The network executive is the dumbest creature that ever lived on the earth. Can't feed itself, can't clothe itself. It's nothing but rampant ego, power, greed, and sin. With legs. That's what they are. And it looks like, I'm sorry, my playback is locked up. It looks like we still got a good web signal, so I have to go ahead and get this thing going again. That's what they are. They're awful, 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 awful people. And what they want is they want to be perceived as deep. And what I really mean by that is they want to be perceived as creative. They want to be perceived as creative. And somehow or another, the system has kept them away from being creative because they know they'll screw it up. But the typical network note would be somebody's watching Unforgiven, and some 27-year-old who's making $300,000 a year as the, vice president in charge of development is watching a movie like Unforgiven, some Clint Eastwood masterpiece, or Gran Torino. And then it's like time to give notes. And this person's making $300,000 a year, and they're C students. They're nothing burgers. They got there through politicking and ass kissing. And so at the end of the screening of Unforgiven, and it's time for notes, they'll lean forward very seriously and they'll say something like, Clint, love it. I think it's just great. I'm a little concerned that it might be a little dark. I'm a little concerned that there's a couple quadrants we could get with just a couple of minor changes. And so I'm wondering, and I just throwing this out there, just spitballing it, just throwing it against the wall, see what sticks. But Clint, what do you think would happen if your character were to have a talking dog? What if there was like a talking dog that went? And the dog doesn't have to actually speak. It's just he's the only person who can hear the dog. And maybe we could get like, I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of thinking like what's his name? The comedian with the face all screwed. Not Greg Gutfeld. What's his name? The guy who squints all the time. That guy with a crazy voice. He could be the voice of the talking dog, and only your character could hear him. But it add a little humor and a little. He could say wise things too. And Clint Eastwood is sitting there. Now, imagine it's not Clint Eastwood. Imagine it's somebody who has to listen to these idiots, because Clint Eastwood just laugh and get out of the room, and they never do a picture with them again. But imagine that you're not Clint Eastwood. Imagine that your person is dependent on the paycheck that these people are writing, and you have to sit there and listen to this crap. And I've heard it. I've heard stuff exactly like that. I've heard stuff exactly that stupid. I have never, and I did Sunday Morning Shootout for 5 years, 6 years, Gilbert Gottfried. I'd done a number of specials for Discovery Channel, History Channel that I edited, and I am telling you, 1 in 10 network notes are marginal improvements, and the rest of them are just absurd. And so they all want to be creative. They want to be deep. You see, they want to be thought of as thinkers. Actors have this disease in spades. When you see an actor on the set of a movie with War and Peace under their arms and wearing glasses that don't have any prescriptions in them, they're lenses, there's just no prescription. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. I've seen this frequently. I've seen actors sitting in Starbucks with glasses, and I just take a look because I have a pretty good feeling. And you can just kind of move around a little bit, just kind of glance over there. He says, no kind of refraction at all, because there's no lens in there. It's just a piece of flat glass. But they're wearing glasses because it makes them look smart. And they're sitting there studying, very quietly studying, War and Peace. And every now and then they pick up the book just to turn it over, something so everybody can see. This is the kind of posing and vanity that makes up this town. And so the only people that don't get any respect in this business are writers. And the reason writers don't get any respect is because they're whores. I'm generalizing. But the Writers Guild has 20 IQ points on the Directors Guild, and it's got 40 IQ points on the Screen Actors Guild. But What writers don't have, as a general rule, is they don't have any guts at all. None. They don't have any guts at all. There's a classic Hollywood joke, and I don't remember how it works. It's not a great joke, but some producer is sitting outside a bar, and he's in a limousine. He tells the driver, he says, "Son, I'll give you $200 if you go into that bar and bring me out a whore within 5 minutes." And 3 minutes later, this guy shows up, and he's got a writer with him. Pretty much it, right? They're filled with self-loathing, most of the writers in this business. They're just filled with absolute self-loathing. There's something about them that works well in the dark. And there's a whole Stratosphere Lounge to be done on nothing but how so many of the mythologies we've come to believe are written by writers who want to undo and redo their dysfunctional childhood. John Hughes made a living at this. John Hughes was a nerd who got turned down in high school and made a series of movies where the underdog nerd gets the girl, and other nerds like me grew up watching these movies and believing it, but it ain't never happened that way, and it ain't never going to happen that way. It just doesn't happen that way. The head cheerleader never leaves the football captain for the dorky guy in the funny outfit because he cares so much about her and because he's got such a great sense of humor. It never happens. It never happens. But we believe it happens because guys like John Hughes and guys like me write stories, and we undo what happened to us, and we write in what we wanted to have happen to us. It's why we become writers. We want to modify reality and change it. And science fiction writing is showing a world that we would like to see, or a world that we wouldn't like to see. It's all very narcissistic, and it has to be. But writers have no guts, and they don't stand up for themselves. They're generally speaking, there have been some writers with pistols and Hemingway and all the rest. They're just exceptions that prove the rules. Writers will do anything to get movies made, and so will actors. But actors are cast to play roles, and so the roles are written by writers, and writers will do anything to get their movies made. So, with all this said, there's a contempt for writers and a desire to want to be one of them, but there's just a general contempt. So you'll make a movie like Avengers, spend $200 million on special effects, and maybe you'll pay the writer. Well, I guess Joss Whedon wrote it. He's got a name because he's a writer-director. He's got power as a director. But if you were to just hire a writer for these things, you pay the guy $50 grand, $100 grand, $200 grand, something like that on a $200 million movie, because most of these idiots don't understand the power of the story. And without story, you've got nothing. Next question. Michael Hanna. What is the power of story? Wasn't that beautiful? I was about to say something just flip and easy, which is story is everything, but I'll say something sophisticated and deep. Story is everything. It's everything. It's only very recently that I started thinking about story. I read a screenplay book. I've mentioned this before. I'm not going to go into too much details. I'd read the classic screenwriting and Making Good Script Great. These are great books on how to write movie screenplays. Screenplay, something, I forget. But then I read a book called Story, written by a really unpleasant guy. But once I read Story, somebody's going to tell me the name of this guy, I can't remember. I realized that, you know what, I'm going to tell myself the name of this. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not helpless. I'm not a raft floating down river. I have an iPhone. And I have books. So the person who wrote Story, his name is, hold for the drum roll. Probably could have gotten faster waiting for somebody, and I'm going to have to... Oh, come on. I have 50 books that are downloaded in here. All right, somebody's going to beat me to it. There it is. Robert It's coming up. It's coming down. It's coming in now. Coming through Nowcon. Come on. Robert McKee. Looks like it. Can't get the page up. Yeah, Robert, it looks like McKee. Anyway, sorry about that. He wrote a book called, thank you, Robert McKee. Wrote a book called Story. And he said so many things. It's not well written. It's all over the place, I think. It's funny because his book about story has no real story to it. However, there's not a book I've ever highlighted more than this book. And he says things in the book that just shocked me. I've written probably 7 or 8 full-length movie screenplays, and I had no idea what I was doing before I read this book. None. I was just hacking through it. I didn't have a map. I didn't have a destination. Didn't have a plan. I'm just hacking through it with a machete. he would say things like, if the emotional charge of a scene is not the opposite of what it was at the beginning of the scene, then that scene doesn't need to be in the movie. That scene needs to be cut. What? Every single scene, the end of the scene has to be different emotionally charged than the beginning of the scene? Yeah. That's a lot of work. Yeah, it is a lot of work. That's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's true. If something doesn't happen in that scene, that's the definition of happen. Something changes. If something doesn't happen in that scene is just dead air. Get it out of the script. Wow. Wow. And 100 others like that. 100 others. Talked about the different kinds of stories and and the idea, simple things that may seem obvious, but that weren't obvious, not to me anyway. The idea that you have these, see, I mentioned earlier that it's hard for a writer to build conflicts into his story. He doesn't want to build conflicts into his story. He wants everything to sail along and make your point and have the good guys win and the bad guys are vanquished and the orcs get killed and that's it. But in order to make the character interesting, you have to put him in danger and you have to have a dark night of the soul. And to make him human, you have to have him do bad things, not just good things, because people do bad things. And then he has to overcome it, feel guilty, all this other stuff. But one of the simple little things he said was, when you have the protagonist come in contact with the antagonist, every single time they come into conflict as the story goes on, the stakes have to get higher. And that's an obvious thing to say, but that's how you know it's brilliant, because it is so obvious. It never occurred to me, but it's really true. It's like the stakes have to get higher. Every time there's a confrontation, it has to get more intense. Can't get less intense, because otherwise it's boring. It's going downhill. So I applied many of these things to big bad problems. I have this first confrontation with the government agents, and it's kind of a just sort of an intimidation thing. It's kind of a warning, and then there's a attempt on their lives, and then there's a serious attempt on their lives, and then they take some lives, and it's like every time these two forces meet, it gets ratcheted up. It's ratcheting up the tension. Brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant, 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 brilliant. But we're talking about the small story, small s story. How do you make a story? How do you make a screenplay into a story? There's a big S story. By the way, that's another thing. He talks about little T truth and big T truth. And he says one of the most boring, useless, stupid movies you can make is a movie that is an absolute slice of life. You see the character gets up in the morning and maybe he's a heroin addict. So he walks over to the sink and he brushes his teeth and the water that comes out of the tap is dirty because he hasn't turned on the sink in 4 days. And he doesn't have any toothpaste, so he brushes his teeth with, baking soda or whatever and so on. It's like, okay, this is gritty. But he says if all you do is tell the story of this guy's real life, that's not a story. That's not truth. That's small T truth. Yes, it's true. That's what it looks like, but that's not the bigger truth that you have to go for. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to do a show business show was because I'm against all of this in politics. The left news media doesn't report the truth because of the big truth. That's horrific in journalism. We're not talking about journalism. Everything has to be bigger. It has to be focused. It has to be concentrated. You have to make a point. Contrast. And so he said, if you do something that's just a slice of life, I get up, I go to my job in the insurance company. It's not particularly boring. That's not realism. It's not interesting. Something's got to happen. And so when you start thinking about story, you have to ask yourself, when we pick up this character, this protagonist, why are we picking him up now? The first scene in Star Wars, go back to something everybody's seen. It's just nice to talk about Star Wars, not because it's the best example, because everybody's seen it. That's an awfully good example, I have to say. So when do you first see Luke Skywalker? Well, he's standing out there alone, and he's on this planet, he's by himself, and he's got these two older aunt and uncle, and he's obviously unhappy, and he's restless, and he wants to go off to college, basically. So why did we meet Luke there? Why didn't we meet Luke 3 years earlier? Why didn't we meet Luke 2 years later? Why did we meet Luke Skywalker when we meet Luke Skywalker? We meet Luke Skywalker at the time and place we meet him because that's when his adventure begins. I know it seems obvious, but it's not obvious. That's when his adventure begins. If you come in earlier, it's dead air. If you come in later, you've missed something important. That's when his adventure begins. These are the elements of story that make up story, but the big story is a much more interesting idea. The big story is, why are we telling the story? And when you get into this, you get into what is it about story, and the more you think about story, the more you begin to realize that everything is story. Everything is story. we don't speak the English language. We use the English language to tell the language of story. We tell stories. It's nothing but story, and it's got nothing to do with the movies. The movies are just a form of storytelling. I mean, seriously, what happens when Dad comes home at the end of the day? Honey, how was your day? And we start the story. Right? We don't get a PowerPoint presentation. We get a story. We get a story that's told. And as people get, this is second nature for them. Honey, how was your day? Well, I was this and this, and I went to work, and so yelled at me again, and they'll tell it in such a way that it builds to a climax, and there's an antagonist and a protagonist, and there's forces of evil, and it's what we do. Children learn through nothing but stories. All of the books we ever learned were just stories. Even the sort of educational books were story. The Bible's nothing but stories. Jesus didn't stand there with a chalkboard and all right, here's why you need to be kind to other people, even people who you don't think are going to be kind. There's goodness in everybody. Just take my word for it. It doesn't say there's goodness in everybody. Believe me, I'm the Son of Man. Just take my word for it. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan, a despised person who shows kindness, and everybody can relate to that story. And the prodigal son is a story. They're all stories. It's how we communicate. It's an efficient way. Here's what it is. And I haven't really, it's a great thing about the show. One of the reasons why I like it so much is I learn a lot from the show. It just hit me like a thunderbolt. What a story is information conveyed with emotion. It's both. It's the head and the heart together. It's information conveyed with emotion. So it's not just the rudder of information, and it's not just the propeller of emotion. It is directed emotion where you learn something. And that's what story is. And so if everything is a story, and it is, then you got to tell a good story. I mean, I have to tell you, and I don't mean this to sound, it's certainly not false modesty. This is genuine modesty. And I certainly don't want to cast any aspersions on any of you. I know this sounds like I'm going to say something awful, but I mean this from the bottom of my heart. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that people watch the Stratosphere Lounge. I never get over it. I'll look at YouTube. It's like 5,000 people sat in front of me just gassing for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And they keep watching it seriously. And then like I said, it's not false modesty. False modesty is trying to say, well, I'm not really. The reason people watch the Stratosphere Lounge, it happens. And the reason has to be because I can tell a story. I can make things interesting. And when I say I make them interesting, what is it about it that's interesting? Now, I'm conveying a lot of information here, but the fact that there's no computer graphics, I don't have things exploding behind me, I don't have naked chicks walking around, God knows the numbers would go way up if I did. Well, what is it about this 2.5 hour thing we do every week or every other week or whatever? What is it about it? I'm telling stories, and I'm making them interesting because it's information that is interesting, but I'm telling it in such a way that the heart gets connected, that it's an emotional reaction to it. And that means there's a certain amount of inflection, there's a certain amount of pause, there's humor, there's all this other stuff that makes it interesting when it wouldn't necessarily be interesting otherwise. Somebody could go through the highlighted parts of story and just read them to you in a monotone. You'd take 3 minutes of that and you'd be out of here. So it's all about story. And when you get right down to it, it's an extremely efficient way to convey information. Because information has to be processed by the human brain, and it has to be connected to, and it has to be interesting. And it's not just the data that's interesting, although the data is interesting. It's got to have an emotional appeal. Now we get the feedback, and all of you very kind and talking about why you like the show, but I have to scroll down because I don't want to miss the name again. I hate it when that happened. David Reel just said it's like talking with a friend, Bill. And we went to we used to do the show on the stage, and now we do this because it's better, looks better. It didn't work on the stage. I can use this stage, the Stratosphere Lounge stage, right over there when we get to guests. But if it feels like a friend, it's because I am a friend. I mean it. You can't fake this kind of thing. The reason I may feel like a friend and that I've been talking to you personally is because I am. I'm not one of these people who feels better than other people. I don't feel better than my audience. I feel less than my audiences. I understand that right now, as of this second, there's 156 people watching this live. There'll be probably 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people watching it at some point in the future on YouTube. And every single one of you watching this knows hundreds of things more than I do. And I am astonished by this. I learned so much, and I have an enormous amount of respect. And the idea that people are paying me money to do this, that I'm living this life and have this incredible studio because of other people parting with their hard-earned money, it's a constant source of amazement to me, amazement and joy and pride. So if it seems like I'm talking to you as a friend, it's because I am, and I'm not trying to blow sunshine at you. I mean, I know it's a one-way street, but I treat the people on the other side of that camera like they're my friends because I feel like they are. They've helped me enormously, not just financially or professionally, but emotionally and personally. I've said this many times. When I started getting the feedback from eject, I had to step up and become a better person than I was because I had to live up to people's I had to step up to their expectations of me. I had to be the kind of person that they thought I was. And it's been wonderful. And when I go on the road and get to meet people in person, I think I said it last time or a couple times ago, I was in Baton Rouge last, and people just come up to me and say, sometimes I couldn't get out of bed without your work. I mean, it makes me cry. It's astonishing. It's lovely. So it's a feedback loop. But anyway, the reason the Stratosphere Lounge works is because it's all stories. And the worst produced show in television on the internet is part of the story. And it's a running gag, and it covers the errors by laughing at it. I'm not laughing at you, and I'm not being snarky about it. I'm laughing at me because I will say that the Ustream is not a particularly robust or user-friendly platform. It does seem to change every single week, and every single time I think I have it sorted out, I don't. But I keep making the same mistakes with the muting and stuff. I keep thinking I got it understood when I don't. So these are running gags. It's part of the whole deal. So the story is everything, and when you see a movie that's boring, even though you've got $100 million of special effects in it, it's because there's no story. And I have to tell you, I love Superman. I think Superman is is heartwarming, tear-jerking story. The Superman myth and legend is America in a nutshell. But I didn't like the previous Superman movie, and I didn't like the last one either. The last 2/3 of the last Superman movie is an indestructible, immortal CG character punching another indestructible, immortal CG character through trains and through walls and through bank vaults and all that other stuff. I've never been so bored in my life. Ever been so bored in my life as watching Superman battle General Zod in that last thing. Oh, I'm going to knock you through a building. Oh, I'm going to bang you through a wall. Oh, I'm going to smack you with a train. Well, I'll smack you with a ship. You're both indestructible. Neither of you can be killed. Until the final thing when somebody's going to get somebody in a headlock and break his neck or something like that, right? And it's ridiculous, and it's dull. And the reason it's dull is there's no story there. There's no interesting part of the story. Now, obviously, go back over a lot of, 100 episodes coming up. There's a lot of ground I tread twice, but not everybody gets to watch everything. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to say it again because I think it's so important. You should write what you know, and if you don't know what you're writing about, you should probably do a little research. Mitchell and Webb have a couple of sketches where there are these two guys that are writers that don't understand it, so they write a medical drama, and it's like, looks like he's feeling poorly. Nurse, bring the medicine. It's hilarious. It just goes to show you what bad writing is about. But the point I want to make, and I've made before, is this. An audience may not know that the writer doesn't know what he's talking about because they don't know what the subject is either. So they may not know that the writer doesn't know. But when the writer does know, they know. And for me, the classic example, as I've mentioned before, was Crimson Tide. I know a little bit about subcombat. I wasn't on subs, but I know enough about it to know what sounds about right. And when these guys come out and it's an authenticating the message, and it's like on the 1MC spin-up tubes 1 through 24. It's an odd language. On spin-up tubes 1 through 24, but that's what they say. And it sounds different and unusual. And when they come out of the room with the encrypted thing and they're holding it up in the air, in the plastic thing, it's like, why are they holding it in the air? They're holding it in the air because they have to hold it in the air, because if they don't, somebody could switch the message, you see? And when you see that kind of chrome, that's what we generally call these kind of details. When you see that kind of chrome, I said, I don't know who wrote this, but this guy knows what's going on. Turns out the advisor on Crimson Tide was a former commander of the Alabama. And it shows. And so while audiences may not know it's missing, when it's there, they feel it. And that's what I aim for. One example I've used before, too, is there's the script is so far away from me now. I've been so concentrating on Big Bat, and I got Common Sense Resistance between them. But there's a scene in Aurora where it's a visually dramatic scene where a astronaut gets caught in these little transfer modules that go from these habitation models out there hundreds of yards away, and the thing's swinging. It's a centrifugal gravity thing, and the thing's on a cruise for a year and a half. So it doesn't care if these things are out there, just reels it in when it needs a burn. But anyway, I had this scene that I liked a lot where these little transfer modules that go up and down to the main core, one of them sticks a couple feet away from the core, and that requires another guy to go up a ladder and to climb up this thing, rescue this person, and then carry her back down the ladder. She falls off, and these things are spinning, and it's like these giant things the size of a school bus or a semi-truck swinging past you. It's dramatically really interesting. It's great storytelling. It's a great visual. It's different. It's unusual. It's cool. But I could have just had him say, "Oh, it looks like the engine burned out," or "Oh, it looks like we got a problem with a thing." But the part of my head that is working on these things says, "Yeah, but if the motor were to burn out in real life, what would they do? Because you can't have a single point of failure like that. What would the backup be? Why is this dangerous?" And I had to defeat 3 or 4 fail-safe things in a believable fashion. That took a lot of work. It took a lot of work. A lot of mental work. And I'd find, you know what, that doesn't make sense. That just doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. They'd obviously be doing this. So you have to do the work. But when you finally film something like this, people believe it. And I think the one thing that pulls people out of the story more than anything is oh, come on. How many times have you had that experience? You're in a movie theater, and the movie's okay, or maybe it's not okay, but whatever. You're kind of there, and you forget you're in a movie theater. And then somebody does something. One of the characters does something so stupid that you just go, "Oh, come on." And it's so stupid because no one would do that, but the writer needed it to happen so that he could make something else happen. It's just raw laziness. It's laziness. It's like any other form of laziness in any other trade. If somebody's supposed to put down six nails per foot and they put down 2 nails per foot, then it's laziness, and it shows. So the "oh, come on" moment has got to go. And good writers never let that creep into their thing. One of the things I like most about Big Bat Problems is that it's so cutting edge technology-wise, bleeding edge technology. They're using drones. They're using apps. They're using these cheap Brookstone things. You just roll it into a room. But one of the great "oh, come on" moments in history is a moment that is in a movie I like very much, which is the first Alien. And Sigourney Weaver's in the shuttle. She's ready to go. She's going to escape the alien. And then she hears a meow. And she goes, "Oh, Jonesy." And she goes back out after the cat. Look, I have cats. I might go after them. But I don't know. The point is, everybody in the audience aloud went, "Oh, come on. Come on. Don't be an idiot. Leave the cat." But she goes back for the cat. People just groaned. It wouldn't happen. You see a horror movie, and there's this, scantily clad 19-year-old, and she's alone, and 15 of her closest friends have been brutally murdered, and she comes upon body after body after body after body after body, and she's in this house, this deserted house in the middle of nowhere. And she's getting the hell out of there. The car keys are in her hand, and she's walking past the open door down into the basement, and she hears a crash of something down in the basement, and she turns around with her flashlight because she wants to find out what's going on down there. And people say, "Come on!" Anybody would run for the door. Anybody would run for the door. But no, the writer has decided that he's got to show the monster, which is what he has to do. But don't do that. Just don't do it. Don't take me out of the movie with your laziness. So, that's the thing about the story. When people do things that take you out of the movie, they take you out of the movie. Somebody just said, "I love Gravity." Sarjek said they love Gravity. I didn't love it at all. I thought it was spectacular to look at. But just as an example, I'll give you, actually, Gravity's a great example, because there are 2 things in Gravity. There's like a high-level thing in Gravity and a low-level thing in Gravity in terms of awareness and taking you out of the story. So I forget the details because I only saw it once. I thought I was going to want to see that movie 50 times. Only seen it once. No real desire to see it again. But in Gravity, her character is so awful that they had to literally wallpaper over Sandra Bullock. They literally had to take like a roller and roll her face in paste and then stick some character stuff on her, which we're going to tell you about, not show you. We can't show you because she's in space. So we're going to tell you about it, and that'll develop sympathy for you. So it's the dead daughter, right? The daughter died. And she said something to the effect of, I was driving when I got the news, something like this. And she says, anyway, what do you do? He asked her, what do you do when you're finished with a long shift in the emergency room? And she says, I go for a 2, 3, 4 hour drive. You what? I go for a 3-hour drive because that's what I did when I heard the news my daughter died. And I said aloud, I was in a room full of people said, oh, come on. Really? That's what you do after 14 hours in an operating room? Years after your daughter died, you spend 14 hours in an operating room, and when you're done, the first thing you do is drive for 3 or 4 hours because you got to get this out of. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I just said it out loud. I mean, when people look at me, it's like, nope, I don't believe it. That's how offensive that was to me. And a slightly less offensive one, but not much less offensive, is why couldn't she have been an astronaut, right? She's flying a Chinese capsule. She's doing all of these orbital mechanics stuff, which if she was an astronaut was still taxing the imagination. But she wasn't an astronaut. She was a surgeon. Why was she a surgeon? She was a surgeon because she had to operate delicate parts and replace them on the Hubble or whatever it was. So you have to be a surgeon to put a bolt on something? I would have thought an engineer would be the guy you'd want in something like that. We're going to have you be a surgeon because you are the only person with the hands steady enough to undo a bolt? When has a surgeon ever had to undo a bolt in his life? What makes you think a surgeon can undo a bolt with bulky gloves on? You'd think an engineer would be the kind of person you'd want to have undoing bolts, or maybe an astronaut who'd been trained. But no, it's just laziness. We're going to make her a doctor. Why? Because then we could tell the story about how she was in the emergency room when her daughter died and she went for a long drive. Does her being a surgeon ever play into this movie in Gravity? Does the fact that she's a doctor and not an engineer ever pay off? No, no. Does she ever need to be a surgeon in the movie? No, she doesn't. Laughing Hyena says, I was itching for her to die in Gravity. I was too. By the time she's riding this thing on the outside of this thing, re-entering the atmosphere, I said, boy, I hope she doesn't make it. I hope she just burns up with the rest of it. And then, finally, after the 9th near-death experience she experiences, she finally gets back in the capsule lands, and the capsule lands in the only pond in the entire Asian continent, happens to land in the only lake in the Asian supercontinent, and she's going underwater, so now she has to escape again. She's only been through, 19 escapes? Now we have to have another one? We're going to lather on here? I wanted her to drown. I really did. I thought that'd be cool if she drowned at the end. That'd be ironic and kind of cool. It just, it's PAX 77-1 says it offends your intelligence. It does. It's an insult to my thinking ability. And it's also part of the same kind of thing. Here's an probably the most spectacular visual effects I've ever seen. I saw it in 3D, in IMAX, and the first 17 minutes is one take. It's breathtaking. I have not seen it again because it is so stupid. And I don't care. And George Clooney, he's an astronaut, and he's jet-setting around in this jetpack, this experimental jetpack. He's looping and rolling around and doing all these other things. Well, you know what, George? No, I don't believe it. And what is he talking about the first time you hear this astronaut? Is he talking about fixing up his cars? Oh, yeah, something banal and stupid like this, right? Like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get back. I'm going to be building my hot rod. Yeah, laying out the thing. Whatever he was saying, I have no memory of it. Well, I love to go fast. I've been working on hot rods. You ever listen to astronauts when they're in space working on EVAs? That's not what they say. So the question becomes, why did he say it? Why did the writer put this words into his mouth in the very beginning scene before the first of the collisions happen? Why did George Clooney go jet-setting around like a lunatic on an ATV talking about his cars or whatever the hell he was talking about? Do astronauts actually do that? No. Would the movie have been better if I believed he was an astronaut? Yes. So why do you have to have that conversation right now? Because we want to show what a character he is, see? What a character he is. Who cares? He's not a character. He's a cartoon. He's a joke. He's a joke. He's not a character. There's no depth to that character. He's a joke. Maybe if you were worried about your fuel supply later on, it's like, oh, I don't know if we're going to have enough fuel. Well, maybe you shouldn't have been jerking around out there, riding around like a lunatic, because Mission Control would have grounded you for the rest of your life if they caught you doing that. And Sandra Bullock has to be Is it better, really, that she doesn't know how to fly a capsule and then she flies the capsule? Is that more interesting? Because I don't find it more interesting. I find it ridiculous. I find it ridiculous. Sandra Bullock's extremely attractive and extremely sympathetic, and people like her. And they would have liked her if she was an astronaut. So this whole business about her being a doctor and the whole thing about Clooney being a character is a lazy, lazy, lazy writer throwing it in on the top. And the classic example I come to all the time is in Top Gun, right? Top Gun. These guys just, they're out there fighting Joker in Top Gun school, and Maverick and Goose defeat their instructor by going through the hard floor. Basically, in order to avoid hitting the ground, we're going to say you cannot go below 6,000 feet, let's say. If you go below 6,000 feet, you've hit the ground and the simulation's over. The fight's over. So they burst through the hard floor there, and then they shoot down Jester, and they're so proud of themselves. Ha ha, we got him. And you busted the hard floor. You not only didn't win the fight, you're not even just going home. You're court-martialed. You're done. And my friend Steve was an air traffic controller for many years in the Air Force, and I asked him this a long time ago. So then Maverick's coming back from having basically just committed a court-martial offense. And see, this is the kind of thing that makes me nuts. Because if Maverick had just come back and buzzed the tower and the guy had spilled his coffee and go, damn it, Maverick. Okay. But that's not what he does. He says, permission to buzz the tower. Negative, Maverick, the pattern is full. Maverick, what are you doing? Here we go. Oh. So he goes in and buzzes the tower after being denied permission to buzz the tower. And I asked my friend Steve what would happen to a guy in a case like that. I'll never forget his answer. He said, well, if a guy busted the pattern and buzzed the tower after being denied permission, then when the F-14 would have rolled to a stop, there would have been a couple of Humvees out there with MPs, and when the canopies came up, there'd be 4 guys with AR-15s or M4s leveled at him saying, get out of the cockpit now, get out of the cockpit, get on the ground now. And he would have been handcuffed, and he would have been taken away, and he would have gone to the brig for years and years and years. No one ever would have hurt him again. And that's what would have happened to him. But the ultimate ridiculousness of it is not even that that's what would have happened. It's not even ridiculous that that didn't happen. What's ridiculous is that he did it in the first place, because this is now the laziness of the Hollywood writer in action. This is the laziness of the Hollywood writer. They're so lazy that they think in order to make this interesting, they have to make him a rebel who's standing up and, who's busting clearances and mouthing off to his commanding officer. When in point of fact, those kind of things would get him grounded. Well, the writer will then say, well, the audience doesn't know that. That's true, but they also don't know how much better that character could have been if they had not been so lazy. How much more interesting he would have been if he was a tightly disciplined guy who was having issues with fear. Isn't that more interesting? Don't you think? Isn't it more interesting that a guy who's got this false bravado, who lives with this false bravado, oh, it's all about me, I'm all Maverick, go look at me, and then he's got this moment of fear, and then he kindly comes around. Isn't it more interesting if the guy was in fact just a ball of discipline who then was suddenly terrified? Don't you find that much more interesting than a guy who's filled with false bravado, a guy who was genuinely brave and genuinely disciplined, and now he's suddenly afraid? Don't you realize the internal conflicts that are so much more interesting there, and how much more terrifying that is to the guy, to the character? And Maverick's obviously a broken guy. I mean, he'd never get into fighter pilot school. He'd never even get into the school. And all of those defects of Maverick's character would have been washed out long before he ever soloed a jet. They would have found out about him a long time ago, and if he was still flying, he would have been flying C-17s. Not that there's any shame in flying C-17s. However, the thing about fighter pilots, it's so interesting, and I know our friend Viper's here, so I'll just say this as it comes out. The thing about fighter pilots and test pilots, just stay with fighter pilots for a minute, that's interesting is that they're not hot dogs on the ground. The thing that's interesting about a fighter pilot is, I know because I wanted to be one, and I would have been a hell of a good one too. I would have been a wizard of one. The thing about a fighter pilot is they're extremely aggressive. They're very aggressive, very confident, but at the same time, they're tightly disciplined, professional men. That's so much more interesting than this kind of, that's what I hated about the Star Trek reboot with Kirk. He's a tight-fisted, rides a rebel. He rides his motorcycle, and he's fighting his way into Starfleet Command. The original James T. Kirk was described as a stack of books with legs. It's so much more interesting if if Maverick is what a real fighter pilot is, which is a professional warrior, professional killer who has all of this stuff under control, then if he has a crisis and he's experiencing real fear, maybe for the first time, but certainly fear that's debilitating him for the first time, then his self-image, not just his self-image, his entire conception of self is destroyed. It's so much more interesting. And it's so much more believable, but that's hard. And in order to write a fighter pilot like that, with that kind of depth, you have to know fighter pilots. You have to know what kind of people they are. And you have to understand that the fact that this may not look as interesting as a guy, buzzing towers, it's not less interesting, it's more interesting. More interesting for him to be that guy, because there's more to reveal, right? There's more layers. More layers. The thing that's interesting about fighter pilots is the mix of restraint and aggression. Countless stories of guys. There was a guy I know for sure, a guy in Korea. I think it was one guy in an F-86, and he got bounced by something like 12 or 14 MiG-15s or MiG-17s, and he just rolled into them. He just said, I'm going to get them all. Unlike being a sub-skipper, which is a very different mentality, and I've done a lot of flight sims, and I've done a lot of sub-sims, and I've done a lot of sims. I've done a lot of sims. I'm a much better fighter pilot than I am a sub-skipper because I don't have the patience for being a submarine captain. I don't have the patience to get into room to get the shot. And I don't have the patience to dive when a destroyer's closing on me. When I'm doing a sub-sim and a destroyer's found me, I go to periscope depth and I fire all the torpedoes I have at him. I want to hit him. I want to run him down the throat. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. That's not a submarine commander. A submarine commander is an assassin. A sub-commander is an assassin. He goes and hides in a dark place, waits for the target to go by, slits his throat at night, and never utters a murmur. You never even know he's there. That's the kind of person you want commanding a submarine. That's how submarines work. Fighter pilots, on the other hand, have to be aggressive. Because if you're not aggressive, look, there are two modes in a dogfight, right? If you're in a dogfight, you are either shooting somebody else down or you're getting shot down by somebody else. Pretty much it. And so aggression in a fighter pilot is life. Aggression is life. Instead of being somebody who's so worried about what the enemy's doing to him, he's got to be worried about that, obviously, as part of his situational awareness. But the guy has to go on the offense. And sometimes he has to go on the offense against multiple bandits. And if he can stay that aggressive, he will actually stay alive. Because now, instead of it being like, my God, what is this guy doing to me? It's like, what am I doing to this other guy? And that's how you stay alive as a fighter pilot. That aggression and that, I don't want to call it recklessness, but it's damn near recklessness, comes from a place of discipline. And it comes from a place of great emotional calm. These guys don't go in there screaming at the top of their lungs with their hair on fire. They go in cold. That's not to say that their heart's not pounding. It's not to say that there's not adrenaline. I've heard the splash kills guys on these guys. They're full of adrenaline. That's not really what I'm talking about. If you look at the great fighter aces, especially World War I, when they were inventing this, you've got Richthofen, and Richthofen basically said, I don't want you in a fair fight, and I surely don't want you taking on guys one-on-one. Your job is to hang up there in the sun, and when you see a straggler or a guy who can't fly, go down and shoot him down. That's what Richthofen did. That's how he got his 80 kills. He just picked off the weak and the new. And he kept living to fly another day. And Ernst Udet, who developed most of these fighter pilot mantras, the things that became axioms, was constantly talking about how we don't want a fair fight. We want. I forget what the number is, but I know what it was in World War II. It was something shocking, really, really shocking. And somebody's going to know, but I don't know. But it's something like 80 or 85% of all the aircraft shot down in World War II did not know that there was another airplane in the vicinity until they were on fire. In other words, almost all of them were ambushes. Almost all of them. Bombers going down or transports going down. It's incredible because they're on the offensive. And if you're going to take on 5 other enemy airplanes, you better be confident that you can stay aggressive enough to shoot down the one, then it's 4-1, then you shoot down another one, now it's 3-1, shoot down the third guy, now it's 2-1, and you shoot down the other guy, now it's an even fight, and the odds just get better and better and better for you. But that's aggression. That's just raw aggression, and it's a kind of a nutty bulldog kind of thing where it's like you have 15 dogs trying to bite your tail. It's like, no, I want to bite all their tails. Confidence. Sometimes people are overconfident. Those fighter pilots don't live that long. Anyway, I'm just using this as an example for story, for Michael's question about the power of story, because it's easy to tell a weak story. It's much harder to tell a difficult story, and the more you know, the better it is. I think we'll probably end it on this, and we'll do part 2 next time. I did a lot of role-playing games. I did Traveler, played a lot of Traveler. I played a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons, but not much. But I played a lot of Traveler. This is going to make sense in a minute. When you roll a character, you play a character in a role-playing game, and you basically determine your character by a roll of the dice. And there's always a lot of, I won't say cheating, but fudging is probably a better word, because you don't want to have characters that are useless. So you want a guy with like an intelligence of 20 out of a scale of 20, and then he's got his constitution or his health or whatever is 3. You don't want to do that, because like I said, when you're writing your own hero, you want the hero to be victorious. So in a role-playing game, you want your guy to have 20s on everything. You want him to have 20s on everything. Then you'll be awesome and powerful. But that's not interesting, because you'll succeed all the time. And what the designers of several role-playing games said was, if you let the dice do most of the work, it'll be paid off in the end. For example, let's say your character had to have a certain amount of intelligence. Let's just say it's on a scale of 1 to 20. And you wanted a character who had to have a certain amount of intelligence. If you got a guy who comes out with 3 intelligence, you just throw that character away and do it again, because he has to have the intelligence. But what these guys were basically saying is this. If, on the other hand, you got a science officer who needs a high level of intelligence, if you roll a 20 of intelligence, or an 18 or 17 or 19 or something you can get comfortable with, and then you roll a health that's 3, think about what that person would look like, and think about how interesting that is. Then you get into a guy like the villain in Unbreakable. You got a guy who's very smart but very weak, physically weak. What kind of challenges does that pose to him? How can he overcome these challenges using his intellect? It's interesting. These conflicts are interesting. If you got a guy who's got very high intelligence but very low education, what does that tell you? If you've got a guy who's very high education, very low intelligence, what does that tell you? The randomness of the dice roll starts providing you with grist that you can use. It's interesting. It's different. I got a guy who's got a very high IQ, and he's got a lot of physical ability, and his agility is good. He's very agile. He can jump and run and land on things, but his dexterity is very low. He's got like 2. He's a Butterfingers. He's the kind of guy who can run and jump and land on a dime on a platform, and just be a living, walking death bot. And then he goes to reload his rifle, and he drops the magazine every time. It's interesting. It's cool. So that's all I'm really trying to say about this. The essence of the story is the character, and the essence of the character is the dichotomy and the interest. So anyway, I think that'll do it for the show. I have noticed in the comment section lately, sometimes people pick up a little dust devil of an idea, and everybody's talking about a message board. So I know our friend Eisenfire is looking at this show, or will be in the near future. So let's make that happen. We can put it at billwhittle.com. We've been talking forever about a kind of a comment section, or not even a comment section, maybe like a chat room or something like that, where all of you fine people can get together, and I can drop in late in the night and say, hey, look, there's a whole bunch of people in my lounge. So maybe we can do a Stratosphere lounge, where it's just a place to go. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, nothing to do. You can find some like-minded people. It's got nothing to do with me. I keep saying this. I need to keep saying it because it's important. It's important that you understand it. It's especially important that I understand it. It's got nothing to do with me. It's not got anything to do with fans of me. It's fans of the idea. And I did have the opportunity to go out with somebody who had gotten a lot of attention in her day and been pretty famous. And by happy coincidence, I was in Vegas, and I had 2 people come up to me in Vegas and just recognized me in the casino floor. And both times they came up and said, hey, I'm really sorry to bother you. I certainly don't mean to interrupt you. I just want to let you know how much your work means to me and how important it is. And have a good night. And thanks again for everybody, for all of it. And then walk away. And she said, I've been around famous people a lot. And I've had some of this myself. And I've never seen this kind of interaction before. Usually with famous people want to be seen with the picture. They want a picture taken, or they want an autograph or something, so that they can prove they were in proximity. They said, that's not what people say to you. They talk about the work. They don't talk about you. It's exactly right, and that's the way I want it. because it's not about me, and it's not a Bill Whittle fan club. It's an idea fan club. It's a fan club for the ideas that I find interesting and you find interesting. So even now in the comment section, people are talking about Google Plus community, and there's all kinds of ways to do it. So we certainly have the hive mind and the vast intellectual collective to make it happen. So it's something I've been toying with for a while, but there's so many things on my plate. So I know Eisenfire is looking at these names as I am. He's just been a great point guy he's a terrific guy. And so I think we should go ahead and make that happen. And there it goes. They step right up. He says, any volunteers for making a chat room plus forum, hit him up at csrgifted@gmail.com. That's the same address for if you want to be on the inside. You can just send a message saying, I'm in, and you're in. And if you want to send another one to csrgifted@gmail.com and put in chat room in the header, he'll know what to do with that. I, on the other hand, I'm going to get back to work and finish writing the script. But by the way, we have a new opening on the Speakeasy segment. So a lot of people said the first one was a little too NPR, so we went in the other direction. I'll probably post that because Speakeasies are for members only, but if you want to see it, you can certainly become a member. We would love that. And we're going to start doing some interesting marketing stuff starting next week. There is a best of Afterburner ebook in the works, and we should have that the next couple days. And starting next week, you can have your best of Afterburner, probably the 15 or 16 best scripts in ebook form, and all you have to do is join our mailing list. And we never sell those names to anybody. You have my word of honor about that. Was there a tell there? No, we need to get people on our mailing list, and we'll offer an ebook because it's great because it doesn't cost me anything to mail. I could offer bumper stickers, but it's $2 to mail those things. So anyway, we'll be talking about that next time. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. And for now, I think that'll probably do it. It's coming up on 9 o'clock, so it's 2 hours and 40 minutes-ish. 2.5, I guess, given the late start with our music stuff. Hope you like the new music. It was fun, and we'll roll it again next time for the part 2 of the Show Biz Edition, and we certainly have enough room for a second parter there. That's about it. I'm feeling good, looking marvelous, and hopefully you're feeling good and looking marvelous too. And it's just, as always, a great pleasure to be here. And for those of you who are BillWhittle.com members, thank you so much for your membership. Thanks for the groovy posters and everything else back there. And it's a pleasure. So until next time, my friends, I would rather look good than feel good. That's sad how true that is. All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.